Star Wars Rebels Season 2. I had a lot to talk about in the last video, and after that, I was only a quarter of the way through. You heard me say this before, but I'll say it once again. Dave Filoni sucks. Maybe it was the power of hindsight, but Filoni hatred didn't just come out of nowhere. After actually reading the expanded universe and getting into the prequel era comics, in which I just finished Jango Fett open seasons as a matter of fact, you know, the story that shows that Jango despises the Jedi, so it's laughable that Plo Koon actually convinced Boba Fett to cease his act of revenge. I remember I got a comment that asked me for a source that Jango actually hated the Jedi, and that's my source. I haven't even gotten to the Clone Wars shit yet, and there's already a lot of problems. Maybe George Lucas let Filoni get away with a lot more than he should have, but at the end of the day, Filoni did have the choice to adhere to the pre-existing source material, and he chose not to. And after the Disney reboot, he just got even more carried away. He did waste the opportunity to do whatever he wanted in a rebooted timeline, but he still won in the end, as he was entrusted with more and more responsibility with Star Wars. And so he decided to make it a whorehouse for Ahsoka, because he's got to feed that Ahsoka fetish, whatever the cost. Seriously, while I may not have been a Generation 1 Filoni hater, there have been those who dislike Filoni from the very start. They're just overlooked when they come from the niche expanded universe fan base. I think Sam Witwer, for example, has proven that he's more of a Star Wars nerd than Dave Filoni. An example being how Sam Witwer had to remind Dave Filoni that Shmi and Padme had already met. Because now it's been leaked that Filoni's movie is literally Heir to the Empire, my only response to that is... oh god, we're gonna get to that shit stain eventually, don't worry about that. I also wanted to say that I watched the entire show from beginning to end as of the writing of this review, and it took a lot out of me. Instead of being binge-worthy, I was so exhausted that the show went on and on and on and on and on. That's not a good sign. Rebels was not a very entertaining show, but still, I plan to assess the whole thing from beginning to end. I absolutely do try to point out stuff I like if I come across them, but the show's good points are few and far between. I'd also like to say that the main reason this review took so long is because I was trying to make the most detailed assessment of the show possible. What I mean by that is that I stress out when people tell me that I missed something in my review, so I try to talk about as much as I can. Although I sometimes won't talk about everything, because it either didn't occur to me, or I underestimated its importance. That's why I asked for other people's criticisms on Discord, because I wanted to make sure I had everything in mind. But it's very likely I forgot to mention something I should have. I also found writing this script very daunting to write, and that's why this video took so long. I found it daunting to write a script bigger than the last, but I pushed myself to write it anyways. I can only imagine how long my future scripts will be. I mean, you all have seen the length of my Knights of the Old Republic critique, almost 6 pissing hours.
Holy shit!
Anyhow, I might as well finish my Rebels review series before Ahsoka comes out in August. I'm actually hoping it's set back at this point, because the writing is taking me an eternity. Anyways, enough venting. Let's get on to the first episode of Season 2, titled The Siege of Lothal, which I'm gonna say I'm sick of seeing Lothal so much. This is one advantage the Clone Wars actually has, because the characters actually went places and didn't return to the same shitty area because the budget got cut. It's really getting on my nerves. Anyways, we start with an irrelevant opening that is just the Ghost Crew fighting alongside the puny rebel fleet. I think I really dislike when an episode starts like this, because it's just tensionless banter as always, and it feels overused, and it also feels like the episode is wasting our fucking time. Like, for Christ's sake, just get to the point. It's not like we're being shown the massive lift up the Ghost Crew has now that they've got external allies. It's just exactly what it sounds like. A common recurring character that's just there for mission debriefings is Commander Sato. And believe me when I say that's all he exists for, besides one episode we'll get to later in the next season that concerns his nephew. I also have to say that Ahsoka didn't do much for most of the show, minus episodes focused on her. She almost feels like a character who's there to appeal to those who watch the Clone Wars, and never any actual story relevance. This is strange because Filoni is the kind of person who makes her center stage in a lot of shit. Could he actually be showing restraint? I doubt it. So since I've spoken about the unnecessary opening scene already, let's just skip to what could have been the episode's opening. In the last season review, I spoke about how the very first scene in the series with Vader and the Grand Inquisitor should have just been cut out. Well, here, I have the same complaint. Getting to the point would have greatly assisted the structure and pacing. Minister Tua, who has been nothing but a useless supporting antagonist, and wasn't even a villain really, and is confronted by both Agent Kallus and Vader about finding the rebels, since they managed to destroy Tarkin's ship. Surprisingly enough, Tarkin is absent after Season 1. They just take Tarkin out of the show without sufficient explanation. Did the voice actor go on a holiday or something? It's so awkward to have Tarkin taken out of the show after this point. To top that off, the minister is going to be questioned by Tarkin, and you can just tell that she's going to be executed for her failure. Yeah, they are not subtle about it. Darth Vader tells the minister all this, and yep, obvious conflict is obvious. The minister is fearing for her life and resorts to the only thing she can do in this situation. Contact the rebels for help. I fucking knew this was going to happen at some point, given once again, the minister doesn't even come across as a villain. So the minister with her cone hat contacts the rebels. Something I don't understand is how can she contact the rebels so easily? In the scene I just talked about, the minister was unsure how to catch the rebels, but now apparently she has an easy way to contact them? Someone tell me I'm nitpicking. Because this is the show where things just happen with no rhyme or reason to them. So yeah, the minister shows herself and asks the rebels for help. Everyone except Hera decides to hear her out, and she offers secret Imperial information in exchange for safe passage off Lothal, which includes rebel sympathizers. Ezra senses that she is telling the truth, and Commander Sato decides to give the go-ahead to approve the mission. Also, something in the Clone Wars that also applies here. Why the hell are the rebels letting underage soldiers like Ezra into their ranks to be an active battle participant? Would it kill Filoni to make Ezra of age, or nearly of age by the time the show started? Why did Ezra have to be 14? When he was a crew member of the Ghost, it was excusable, but for an armed revolution, you think that the rebels, who are supposed to be the good guys, would have some fucking standards, right? Right?
Apparently not.
I really hate this, but since I've already spoken about this, and I want to keep my sanity in check before the end of this review, let's move on. So yeah, we've got a rescue mission. I'd also like to mention that the show points out some of the bad writing for us. When Hera scolds Kanan for allowing an unauthorized transmission on the rebel fleet, and Kanan just dismisses it by saying that he didn't want to be a part of the rebel fleet anyways, and wants to go back to being an independent crew.
Wow, what an asshole.
Only Freddie Prinze Jr. would make a character sound so douchey. Given his track record, I wouldn't be surprised if he wasn't even acting here. You know, I'd change my mind about not explicitly hating Kanan that much. He's an asshole just like everyone else. I mean, they do try to spin this as Kanan not wanting to be caught off guard in another trap like the Clone Wars, but still, I wish he wasn't such a dick about it. Plus, they don't really elaborate on how Kanan thinks the rebellion could just be another Sith trap. Anyways, the entire Ghost crew get on a shuttle instead of the Ghost, which makes sense I suppose, but despite the Empire's tighter control on the planet, Chopper is easily able to transmit clearance codes and get permission to land. Gee, how easy was that? Knights of the Old Republic actually had a quarantine that was actually strict. as characters were displeased that the Sith Empire wouldn't let them off-world. I keep saying this because it seems like the Ghost Crew can just return to Lothal whenever they feel like it, and there's no gradual consequences for each return. I'm never worried that they'll get caught, because they failed to persuade me the past 50 times they landed on Lothal. Ezra feels a disturbance in the Force that he describes as cold. Yeah, I know it's Vader he's talking about. Let's see how well they portray Vader, because these days, it's either making him a tolerant bitch or uber powerful at will, and they can never get Vader right. Anyways, we're told that the Minister's leaving Bay 23. So yeah, as easily as ever, Kanan knocks out a stormtrooper and takes their armor, further making stormtroopers look like incompetent buffoons. Upon getting into position, they spot Agent Kallus with Minister Tua. Something I have to ask is why the hell didn't the Minister just sneak out? I don't get it. So anyways, ambush from the rebels. They tell the Minister to run to the shuttle, and upon doing so, the shuttle blows up.
And it's gone.
Yeah, that's right, she's dead. D-E-A-D, dead. And do I give a fuck? Hell no. This character had minimal presence in Season 1, and dies at the start of Season 2. Brilliant. I guess it does make sense that the Empire was planning this trap the whole time, so if anything, that's one of the few saving graces of the episode. Zeb and Chopper fly in to pick everyone up, and upon doing so, they're shot down and they crash. Wow. The Empire actually being accurate? Could this episode at last be starting to pick up? The rebels move out of the shuttle, and in the following scene, we see Agent Kallus and Darth Vader plan to turn the trap further against the rebels. The Ghost Crew, in the middle of hiding in Ezra's old place, see the transmission of the Imperials blaming Minister Tua's death on the rebels. Unlike the Empire's other propaganda antics, this might actually be believable in how it was set up. I imagine even the stormtroopers that were there believe that the rebels blew up the Minister's shuttle. But still, the amount of obvious bullshit fed through the holonet or wherever shouldn't work. We don't even get to see the population turning against the rebels ever. Because let's face it, they don't matter at all. With that being said, we cut to the Ghost Crew hiding out at Ezra's old place. And it's here where they tried to prepare for their next move. And conveniently, the place with the least amount of guards is the Imperial complex. And it's their best chance at finding a shuttle to get off. But the Imperials are still on their tail, with a stormtrooper squad trying to get in. As such, they're forced to flee. And Ezra makes a comment that there's no going home now. So to sum all this up, it's the rebels evading capture and getting new information to progress the plot. Not a lot to say here. So Ezra and Kanan respectively pose as guards, in which Ezra tests out his mind trick skills and fails. But of course Kanan steps in and mind tricks the stormtrooper, getting inside, and it turns out they were escorting crates of the rest of the Ghost Crew. There's this stupid moment where Zeb makes quite a lot of noise getting out of the crate, but Sabine confirms there's no one else around. I'm getting kinda sick of the heroes being easily able to do something. So yeah, it's here where Zeb knocks out only 2 stormtroopers on patrol so easily. I really hate the smugness on top of that. They just run across to a convenient shuttle and even collect some shield generators. This almost feels like collecting loot in a video game with no enemies around. Then finally, Darth Vader makes his dramatic entrance, and I have to wonder what stopped him from getting over here earlier. This is the obvious cliffhanger to this episode, because this is a 2-parter. So yeah, how are they going to get away now? Well, in part 2, Vader just toys with them. Of course he does it in a way where he doesn't strike a finishing blow on either Ezra or Kanan. I don't particularly buy that Ezra could even struggle to get his blade away from his throat. The whole thing is set up to be another overpowered Vader encounter that the good guys escape from despite all odds. I say this because he pushes both Ezra and Kanan away constantly. Kanan, and especially Ezra, should have died instantly if we're being real. The thing is that if you lack the skill, your first option should be to run, and that's your only hope for survival. Vader not simply executing his enemies of course gives the Ghost Crew enough time to stall him by getting some walkers to fall on him, which of course he lifts up and casts aside 10 seconds later, but in the believability of the whole thing, they should have fucking died. Upon proceeding to run, which is what they should have done in the first place, Sabine even fires some shots at Vader, and Vader, no joke, deflects the blaster bolts dead center onto her helmet. And she survives without any lasting injury. And yeah, Mandalorian iron is strong. But this is pretty silly. Anyways, they take off in the shuttle, and everyone has their moment where they're exhausted, but relieved they got away from Vader. Something that doesn't make a lot of sense is that Kanan doesn't recognize Darth Vader. As the Emperor's key enforcer, surely everyone in Imperial space knows who Darth Vader is, right? This is pretty much as dumb as Obi-Wan Kenobi having no idea that Darth Vader was around, despite the fact that he should have been keeping up to date on Imperial news by now. He did so in the Expanded Universe novels, and that's how he knew Anakin was alive come A New Hope. Compared to the Expanded Universe, it seems, it makes Vader have not that intimidating of a reputation. If people haven't heard about him until the point they meet him, it's out of place to have Kanan not directly recognize Vader. Like, he puts together that he's a Lord of the Sith, the ancient enemy of the Jedi, but he doesn't know who he is by name. The Emperor's key enforcer should be all over the news and propaganda, for Christ's sake. People shouldn't go up to Vader and be like,
Who the heck are you?
Anyways, the Ghost Crew allude to contacting a certain someone to smuggle themselves off-world. Then we cut to a scene of Agent Kallus being called in by Vader, in which he discusses one of the safe havens of the rebels, Tarkin Town, in which he orders Kallus to burn it to the ground. Wait, so did the Empire know about Tarkin Town and the Ghost Crew's affiliation to it? Why the hell didn't they question the residents during that whole search for the Ghost Crew, especially as they became bigger and bigger targets? I previously assumed Tarkin Town was a quiet, secretive town because naming your town as an insult to the ruthless Grand Moff would get you into trouble. Would it not? Turns out the Empire knew about this town and knew that the rebels hung around there in the past. But now they're gonna burn it down? That doesn't make any sense to me. Because as a potential hiding spot for the rebels, why didn't you wipe it out earlier? Or send spies? Or something that isn't just ignoring it for the longest time? Well, anyways, Hera and Kanan contact Lando of all people, asking them to smuggle them off-world. And in exchange, they'll give him half of the shield generators they collected. So that only leaves them with 3 to give to the rebel fleet. As such, they're told to go to his outpost on Lothal where his droid will hook them up. I mean, based on what I've seen, it was probably either Lando or Vizago, and they probably figured Lando was their best bet, I guess. At least they show in this instance that their best feasible option isn't exactly an ideal one, which is a time they don't make things too easy for the good guys, with a massive empire with such an advantage over them. It's here where, upon arriving at Lando's outpost, Ezra notices smoke from several miles away, and takes a speeder over to see that Tarkin Town's been burnt to a crisp. Kanan accompanies him, and proclaims that everything they do now has a cost. Even though the town's been burnt, it's referenced that they merely arrested everyone, and it feels like they should have been more severe by executing every townsperson, then burnt the town to a crisp, leaving behind a gruesome sight. And yeah, this is a kid's show. But did you really have to underplay the would-be atrocity by saying that all the residents were arrested instead of killed? I also thought there was a missed opportunity for that oh shit moment. Like in A New Hope, there wasn't a scene that told us that the last homestead was going to be burnt. So during that scene where Luke, Ben, and the droids find the jar was slaughtered, Luke slowly pieces together that the Imperials must have tracked the jar was to his home, and the way it's presented, you realize in that moment what Luke realizes, that his home and his adopted parents are fucked. I think it would have been more effective if they cut out the scene with Vader announcing to the audience ahead of time that the Empire was going to burn Tarkin Town, and the rebels can figure out from their own perspective that their actions have consequences, whatever they do. I mean, this whole scene is very obviously supposed to homage A New Hope, right? Anyways, upon returning to Lando's outpost, the Ghost Crew figure out a piss-easy plan to mask their escape. They'll basically use the 3 remaining generators to send a signal, and use it to divert all the TIE fighters, making it easier to escape. This works ironically, and there's zero tension, because by the time the Imperials catch on to the right signal, the Ghost Crew jump into hyperspace. Well, that was extremely easy. Like seriously, what kind of lazy writing is this? Is this really all they needed to leave Lothal? This would have been easier if they had just kept all the shield generators. Why in the hell did they need Lando? This feels exactly like the episode's gotta end soon, but it's gotta happen in the least amount of time, leading to an anticlimactic, rushed, hollow climax. But then I looked at the time on screen, and we're not even halfway through the episode, even though it feels like them wrapping up time just about now. Yeah, we've still got around 10 minutes left, ironically. We're informed in the next scene that there's a tracking device on the shuttle, so Vader and the Empire are prepared to attack the Rebel fleet. Then when they arrive back at the fleet, Chopper only comes in telling everyone the shuttle is tracked. Ugh, I hate this episode. First they escaped way too easily, but now they're being tracked. Like, this makes the whole thing feel sloppy. I could also tell that this was literally only done to have Vader in close proximity to... Well, we'll get to that. So everyone mans their battle stations, blah blah. Ahsoka herself even asks to tag along, and Ezra welcomes her aboard. And I just fucking cringe so hard at that. Darth Vader unsurprisingly shows all the Rebel pilots what pod racing looks like, and he easily dodges all of the Rebels' attacks, and blasts them all to smithereens. The ghost ship finally detaches, although none of the manned turrets can get a good shot at him. Ahsoka asks Kanan to connect their force powers to get a feel for the presence on the TIE Advance, and yep, Ahsoka feels the presence of Lord Vader, aka her former master Anakin. With that being said, both she and Vader sense each other, and Vader's reaction is literally an unsurprised remark about how his apprentice lives. You know, I wanted to say here that Ahsoka doesn't really do much in this show until the end of this season. And towards the end of season 4, she gets no character development and is pretty much touted out as, hey, you remember this bitch from the Clone Wars? And yeah, I do. And I remember how much I hated her. Let's not beat around the bush here. Ahsoka is an overrated Mary Sue with an oversaturated presence. You've already heard me say this before, but here Ahsoka's entire presence relies on you liking her. She gets no character development, because the show relies on you caring about her in the Clone Wars, which I don't. As pointed out by somebody else, Ahsoka didn't get any on-screen development in the slightest. Filoni just changed her up a bit in between episodes, instead of doing the hard work of writing character during the story and play. And then he made the lethal mistake of having her live towards season 5, which if there was ever a time Ahsoka should have died, it was season 5 of the Clone Wars. Provided you ignore all the times she cheated death that was utterly ridiculous. To be honest, I don't really have much to say about Ahsoka, save for the times I talked about. The show relies on you creaming your pants whenever she's on screen, by presenting her as this mature leader of the rebellion, and it's not earned in the slightest. After all, they're literally ripping this straight from a certain other apprentice. Just like everything else, there's a lack of earning anything. So what do I think of Ahsoka in this show? I think they relied too much on you liking her before this point, because Filoni expects you to clap like a seal whenever she's on screen. Like seriously, the show pretty much treats Ahsoka like its own personal Jesus. It's hard to describe, but think about how Toby and Andrew were presented in Spider-Man No Way Home. They had a rather limited role in the film, come to think of it, because they were built up for a hyped reaction, and they were there to mostly assist the newest Spider-Man's arc and whatnot. And that was it. Okay, I suppose that for Andrew Garfield, they gave him that speech about how being Spider-Man after Gwen Stacy's death wasn't easy, and he was pissed off at himself for his actions. But point is, they were placed in the movie to hype everyone up and stick around for the climax. The movie relies on you liking these two pre-established characters based on previous material, and does little to add to the story and play, happening in the present. That's pretty much how Ahsoka is used. She was bait to get you to keep watching by the end of season 1, and she's presented like you're supposed to anticipate her doing cool shit eventually. The key difference is that I hate Ahsoka. I had to deal with a character that hijacked a show, that should have focused on characters like Anakin, Obi-Wan, Padme, etc. This is why I'm sick of seeing Ahsoka. She's a heavily featured Star Wars character, and that's a problem given she's very implausible with the films. I hope that my common running joke of Ahsoka probably living past the rise of Skywalker doesn't come true, because I will slap Filoni in the face so hard his face will go numb for a year. Anyways, in case you were wondering what my take on Ahsoka is in this show, it's that. A character the writers expect you to like, put on a scaled back pedestal if that makes sense. Taunting you with, you want to see more of this character? Tune in next time. I do have another problem with Ahsoka, but we'll save it for the season finale. Point is, Ahsoka and Vader sense each other's presence, and it's done for dramatic effect. And I just scoffed at the screen. Especially where Ahsoka faints from the shock. Yeah, that's another time Ahsoka was knocked out. I've lost count at this point. Following this, Commander Sato is forced to abandon the command ship as the Ghost diverts Vader's attention away. The Ghost manages to jump into hyperspace between the Star Destroyers, in which it accidentally catches a tractor beam on Darth Vader's TIE Advance. Oops. Well, I didn't expect anything that allowed the Empire to win. The Rebels win against all odds all the time in this show. Anyways, everything is bittersweet at the end. The Rebel fleet has been thinned out quite a bit, and something that bugged me is why the Ghost crew wasn't at least given a scolding for leading the Empire back to the Rebel fleet. Instead, it's just Kanan talking about continuing the fight, and when not to engage the Empire. On the other hand, Vader contacts the Emperor to tell him about his old apprentice, and how she must be tracked down. And the Emperor, and I wish I was kidding here, asks Vader to get another Inquisitor to hunt them down. Yeah, that's the thing. You weren't going to get much better than the Grand Inquisitor, so who the hell could be next? It's inevitably going to be a weaker adversary, which is exactly why they jumped the shark too soon on the villains. Anyways, let's get on with the next episode. We start with a recap of the last episode, where they lost a lot of pilots. Again, the Ghost crew are never chastised on their reckless return to the fleet, which is now considerably weaker. Ahsoka suggests a potential recruit into the rebellion, that being Capitano Rex. Ahsoka talks about him being a skilled commander, and with that, she sends the Ghost crew on a mission to go find him. Since she's lost track of Rex for years, she gives them a tactical droid head she very conveniently has to find him. So we all know that they retconned the Ahsoka novel when making Tales of the Jedi Filoni knockoff edition. Both novels describe the Siege of Mandalore very differently, but it's shown in both that both Ahsoka and Rex faked their deaths and parted ways. Well, what I was gonna say was that the tactical droid being able to calculate someone who was lost years ago and could be anywhere is kind of hard to believe. Filoni split Rex and Ahsoka up and struggled to find a way to reunite them. So he just settles for a quick get out of jail free card. And what do you know? They cut straight to landing on the planet where Rex is. Well, that's one way of being lazy with your writing, isn't it? They don't even tell us what they did in between that gap. So Hera and Chopper stay on the ship, while everyone takes the Phantom down to the planet's surface. So the Phantom lands on the surface, and the tactical droid leads them to the very location of the ATTE, that is visually shown to be renovated as a retirement home. So 3 identical old guys come out, and Kanan recognizes them instantly as clones, and pulls his lightsaber out of instinct, and both sides draw arms at each other. They very quickly resolve the scuffle, and now it's introduction time. And both parties introduce each other. Of the clones, they consist of Rex, Wolf, and Gregor. Yeah, that's right. The one-off Republic Commando survived. I also have to say how much I don't like D. Bradley Baker as the sole voice of the clones. As previously stated, he sounds too much like an Australian stereotype voice, given the national accent is way off by many miles. My suggestion has been either get Tem to voice all the clones, or delegate different voice actors, potentially including Tem. Because at this rate, Baker will piss off both Australians and New Zealanders alike for different reasons. Speaking of Australia, and maybe I'm just reading too deep into it, but it's almost like they're referencing Australia a lot in this episode. Start with the fact that they're on a scorched desert planet, which is how a lot of foreigners imagine Australia, as just one big fuck-off desert. Which I can say firsthand, most of the population live in cities by the coastline, like Melbourne, Sydney, Adelaide or Perth, those sorts of locations. We don't all live in the desert. In fact, I live in a suburban area with quite a lot of grass around. Okay, I'm thinking about it way too deep, but can you blame me? I am genuinely offended at how much D. Bradley Baker butchers the Australian accent when he's supposed to be imitating a New Zealander. I've said this already, but thankfully, aside from these three, there are no clones in the show, so we don't get to hear the same guy butcher an Australian accent for the most part, rather than many over the course of 7 seasons. The same cannot be said for the Sad Batch. Anyhow, Ezra informs the trio that Ahsoka sent them to get them back into the fight. Rex talks about how he fought with her from the Clone Wars movie to the Siege of Mandalore, and accepts his unexpected guest with open arms. But of course, upon being asked to join the rebellion, Rex in particular says that he's happily retired and he's earned it. And besides, the Emperor retired all of the clones. Kanan is the first to opt out, given his distrust of clones, which is character consistency, I'd say. You know, before the Sad Batch retconned Kanan's survival, the accepted backstory for his survival was the Kanan the Last Padawan comic. And in that comic, Kanan managed to get a clone to break through his inhibitor chip and help him escape. Since this was the accepted survival story at the time, you'd think that Kanan would understand that the clones were brainwashed the moment the chips kicked in, and thus he'd be more understanding towards the clones. After all, the real perpetrator was Palpatine after all, right? You know, people say that Kanan the Last Padawan is superior to the Sad Batch, but this is a problem that just occurred to me with it. Still, I'm not gonna disagree that the Sad Batch butchered Kanan's survival story, retcon or not. Point is, Kanan hating the clones given the comic is kind of confusing to a degree. Remember that they promised that all material would be equal at the time, until they started breaking that promise, and that a novel would hold the same weight as a movie. Anyways, Wolf objects with Rex and Gregor on helping the rebels, because he's fearful of what the Empire will do if they find out. And this is basically a rare occasion where a character is legitimately fearful of the Galactic Empire. Although, trust me, you're going to fucking cringe at what he does later. Gregor, being the most joyful of the three, asks for something in exchange for the list of bases the rebels need. There's a wild animal out there somewhere on a planet that can give a year's supply of food apparently. So basically, Zeb has to serve as the bait, and I mean that literally. But before we get to that, the Imperials receive a transmission from Commander Wolf, informing them of the Ghost Crew.
What?
Yeah, that's right. Wolf contacted the Empire and informed them on the Ghost Crew. What a fucking dumbass. Is the episode really gonna try and make us believe that this was an appropriate course of action for an ex-commander who knows what the Empire is capable of? You know, when C-3PO did this in Season 1, it was believable and in character. It was fucking stupid that C-3PO was left unsupervised, but still, it's something I can totally believe the droid would do. Here though, this is ridiculous. This is an incompetent decision that's only done to move the plot forward. In other words, decreasing character intelligence to progress the story. Could you not come up with another way of having the Empire track the rebels? You could have just made Wolf a loyal Imperial snitch or something, rather than being fearful of the Empire. That might have actually worked. And it could tie into Kanan's distrust of the clones, so that when Rex does join the rebellion, it leads to a reasonable character conflict, because one of Rex's close friends was a sellout or something. Jesus, I just came up with a solution on the spot. Even the first time I watched this, I was scoffing at Wolf's stupidity. Like a lot of the writing errors, I don't notice on the first watch, but this was an exception. I didn't even need a deeper assessment of the episode to take me out of the story in play. Although to be fair, I was never in the story in play. So yeah, we've got a super lazy excuse for the Empire to show up and cause trouble. It was easily fixable, but oh well. Anyways, we get a discussion with Kanan and Ezra, in which Kanan describes how the clones gunned down his master with him only barely escaping. He also mentions those darn inhibitor chips, and Rex cuts in and incorrectly states that he removed his chip. No. Ahsoka removed it for you. Filoni is very loose with continuity if it wasn't obvious by now. even if it's something he's previously established before or after. Anyways, an Imperial probe droid shows up, and I'm pretty fed up with this show for contrived circumstances. And it's also here where the crew realized that Zeb being bait was a bad idea. Technically, they tried to say that it turns out that he was bait and not a hunter, but seriously, how did these characters fall for Gregor's ruse? In fact, when the giant creature grabs Zeb and drags him out of sight, Gregor is so excited that he probably squirted some piss. At this point, Gregor is so damn annoying. I hate him. So the episode wastes our time with this big game catch, and I have to ask what this has to do with anything.
Absolutely nothing.
To make a long story short, they kill the big animal, and Zeb is alright. Which I'm calling bullshit because nobody could survive that. And the clones have their yearly meal. That is, if they manage to keep it fresh for a year, because when something dies, it naturally decomposes. I think Gregor in particular deserves a punch in the face for his recklessness, but they couldn't even give us that. In fact, Zeb lightens up to the fact that he was almost eaten, and changes his mood unrealistically. This is not only stupid, but one of Zeb's most out-of-character moments. We don't even really get any action in this episode. It's just the Ghost crew fucking around with the clones, and that's it. Boring as shit, and I know I won't be voting for Hillary Clinton ever. The Imperial probe droid and the Empire are going to have to wait, and that makes the urgency non-existent. We even see that the probe droid towards the end gets unusually close instead of scouting out things from a distance. Eventually, Sabine discovers the Imperial transmission, and here, I would have expected bloodshed after finding out they've been ratted out, but everyone surprisingly keeps their cool, and worse yet, Wolf isn't punished for his poor decision-making skills. So they take out the probe shortly after, and nobody seems to acknowledge Wolf's incompetence, despite the fact that he deserves a shot in the back. As always, the cliffhanger isn't earned in the slightest for obvious reasons. I'm still scoffing hard at the sheer incompetence of the writers. A lazy filler hunting episode in a moronic clone. Better yet, it's supposed to be one of Filoni's favourite clones because he was one of the clones who disobeyed Order 66. The inhibitor chips already missed the point of Order 66, but bailing one of your favourites out just so he could later rat out the rebels to the Empire and receive no punishment for it? Ugh, I fucking hate this show. Also, I have to ask, if the ATTE is in the middle of the fucking desert, then where do they get the fuel to keep it running? That's another thing I wondered on the back of my mind watching this episode. Anyways, next episode. Apparently the probe slowed the ATTE down, and repairs will take a while. On top of that, there's a bloody storm coming, and with the Imperials on their tail, they're going to need to put up a proper defense. Hera up in space can conveniently power down her ship to avoid detection from the Empire. Well, at least I can say that powering down comes at a cost. The Ghost crew, despite getting the locations they need to establish a base away from the prying eyes of the Empire, decide to stick around, even with the fact that the clones aren't just going to get back into the fight. Okay, we all know that Rex is going to come back eventually, but I wish they didn't just pad this the fuck out. Anyways, the Empire shows up with a Star Destroyer, with Agent Kallus asking for the clones to give up the rebels. The clones try to bluff that they misspoke, but the probe droid says otherwise. So yeah, we've got a fight. First, a TIE fighter tries to blast the ATTE and misses. Of course. And the clones bring out some old artillery equipment and blow up the TIE fighter. Also, another case of the piss poor writing is where the Imperial Admiral, or whoever, directly tells Kallus that they have the exact location of the rebels on the planet, and asks if they should bombard the area with everything they've got. Kallus, because the writers knew they wrote themselves into a corner, says no. So you're gonna squander the opportunity to take out 60% of the Ghost crew? Like, you got them on a deserted planet no one cares about. And these are the same rebels that have been causing you so much shit. And you have the perfect opportunity to be rid of them. But instead, Kallus decides to go for a ground assault, aka deploying AT-ATs and using those instead. Why the hell didn't you just bomb them from orbit? The logistical answer is because the writers knew that if they did that, the show would be over by this point. Why the hell did they even address the possibility of bombing them from orbit? In what world would deploying AT-ATs be a better strategy than just pulling a Michael Bay and then call it a day? Hey, that rhymed. My god, could the show have been over if the characters made good decisions? So with that being said, Callus's baffling decision to bring 3 AT-ATs to pursue the good guys gives them a chance to improvise and come up with a plan to survive another day. And yeah, the clones decide to turn around their transport and flee as it's their only option. And to make the previous episode even more pointless, they drop the giant creature they use Zeb as bait to get to avoid carrying dead weight. Yeah, the previous episode was utterly pointless. So the AT-ATs fire at the rebels, but narrowly miss every shot. Personally, I thought this was a fucking clown house. That the Imperials with the sheer advantage can't even aim. Am I supposed to be intimidated by the Empire or not? That's a genuine question I have. So Captain Rex is to enter the storm where all the scanners will be scrambled, except for the sensors of a Jedi. And Callus orders his small platoon to move full speed ahead after them. Soon after, they note how they need a good shot at the neck, as that is the weak spot of an AT-AT in this situation. So Kanan uses Force Sense to probably hide the AT-TE in a spot where the AT-ATs will pass them without detection. But all this results in is being surrounded by all 3 walkers. So now the new plan is for someone to take a shot, and for the strangest reason, Kanan puts Ezra up to it, while Kanan continues what they're doing. Well, I suppose there's not much else they could have done. It was either Kanan or Ezra. They try to stress that it's all over if there's one mistake made, and by this point, tension is incredibly low for me. The show can never convince me that anyone's in real danger. Ever. May I remind you that Callus wasted the opportunity to obliterate the AT-TE from orbit. But anyways, Ezra takes a shot and manages to down one of the walkers, allowing an escape route for all of them. I'll tell you firsthand that the original scene this moment was trying to imitate, with Luke relying on the Force to pull that lucky shot on the Death Star. That original scene had more magic and flair to it. This doesn't. It's probably because the stakes weren't emphasized enough. Because the Empire and the show make for weak-ass villains. It feels like a lot of characters could have made this shot. I guess since Luke's lucky shot had proper build-up and the payoff was earned, that's what made it better. Also, since they want to make things incredibly easy for the good guys, the Imperial Admiral is called to another location by Lord Vader. Yes, I'm not kidding. They're abandoning Agent Callus and the ground forces mid-mission. I know you don't want to keep Lord Vader waiting, but you guys just got here. Was there no schedule that was abided by? This makes the Empire look even more weak, as they can't even complete a mission in time. Well, anyways, the crew eventually decide to leave, as the clones will cover the escape. And this, no joke, includes ramming into the AT-AT. And the Ghost crew last minute come back, and better yet, hijack the AT-AT opposite of the one Agent Callus is in, and guns down his walker. There's even a line where Callus points out how the Admiral should have provided air support by now. That there is an admission that things were made way too easy for the good guys on purpose. It leaves Agent Callus to fly on a speeder, but since they only have one, only one of them can hitch a ride, and another one has to use their legs. Oh my god. How pathetic is the Empire? Well, anyways, the clones salute Kanan as their Jedi General by circumstance, and it's here where we see what the callback was for. You want to know what it is? No, seriously, I'll let you have a big guess. It's so they could introduce another fucking Inquisitor. Say hello to the fifth brother, a one-dimensional villain with far less charisma than the Grand Inquisitor, who is the villain for this season. You know, it would have been nice to have an overarching villain for this series, but here, it feels like they're just doing the classic Batman 66 formula of having villains of the week. Only difference is, the villains in Batman are actually memorable, even if they appear for only one episode. Well, anyways, Rex decides to come with the Ghost crew despite saying he's retired for good. There was absolutely no development for his change of heart. It's just a switch that was flicked, and it's also Rex and Ahsoka can meet again and have that reunion. They meet each other and hug, and this was not earned in the slightest. Also, there's something about Rex's reintroduction that makes no sense. Prior to the series finale, Dave Filoni expressed that he wanted Rex to be this random rebel extra on Endor. Officially, he is known as Nick Sant according to both timelines on Wikipedia. He was played by a dude named L. Burner. Filoni specifically designed Rex to closely resemble this rebel extra. That included adding weight to him. This, of course, makes no sense. If Rex was there, he would be physically 72 years old. And it's agreed that this extra looks around 20 years younger. So unless Rex found a way to slow his aging, which I mean, that seems out of character for this universe, unless it was a magic Sith ability to cheat death. Yeah, you see how little thought Filoni put into self-inserting his characters into scenes from the movies. But he was so obsessed with having Rex be in Return of the Jedi retroactively that he decided to model the older version of the character after this random extra without thinking about how little sense it made. But let's be real, Filoni has shown on a constant basis that he'll pave over anything if it suits the story and plays making. The increase in hatred towards Dave Filoni probably came 10 years too late, but it did happen for a reason. And now everyone can see how little Dave Filoni cares about writing in a shared universe, even when he heavily influenced the origins of it. Anyways, with all that being said, that's the end of the episode. And as you can see, we've only covered 4 out of 22 episodes. Ugh. I want to say that pretty much after this point, I watched episode after episode and was not invested the whole way through. The return of Captain Rex was not at all interesting for me, so that fell flat. But the series had that feeling of just going on and on and on. Maybe I should be lenient because this was a show made so that you could tune in every week, but come on. Shows should be entertaining either way you watch it, whether it be as it's coming out or watching it 50 years after it's done and over. I've watched a bit of the OG Twilight Zone, for example, and I can jump from episode to episode and enjoy it. The show was made in the 1950s, so a long time ago. Most of the actors who were in it are dead, unless they were kids or in their 20s when they started in the episodes. Okay, I'm getting off track. The point is, I'm criticizing the series for just being a show you need a weekly break from in order to get into the next episode. Even though I'm watching the show in retrospect, the first time I watched it, I found it so damn dull. Anyways, the next episode is titled Always Two There Are, and I sweated intensely immediately. Even watching the show for the first time, I knew what this was talking about. But anyways, this particular episode starts with Ezra and Kanan practicing force levitation on Chopper, in which Chopper locks down his legs. Captain Rex chimes in after playing that chess game with Zeb, and talks about how his commander always used the force and his wits to win battles. Some very minor praise I'll give to this show is how it name drops Anakin Skywalker. It's very nice how it's done, where Rex alludes to his commander being this great general who always came through in the end, and I don't like how Anakin was portrayed in TCW, but it's something I wanted to point out, and say I liked about the dialogue. Anyways, Hera comes in, and says that one of Rex's listed bases should be searched for medical supplies. So it's a mission for this base in the middle of nowhere. The Phantom with Sabine, Zeb, Chopper, and Ezra go over to what is explained as an abandoned Republic medical station. And what do you know? It's got a dark horror atmosphere. But guess what? It's not gonna top Dead Space. So for the most part, it's just a hike across a cold, dead space station. But hey, you know what? There's a probe droid spying on the 4. And given the last episode teased a new villain, you know exactly who the big bad for this bloody episode is. And hey, they ruin any sort of build-up by cutting to the Imperials realizing the abandoned station has been turned on. The 5th brother senses his enemies there, and arrogantly announces that he'll go alone. Something I have to ask is that unless the Imperials were close in the area, which just seems like a massive coincidence, how would they know that an abandoned space station that no one cares about anymore was turned on briefly? Well, anyways, Ezra arrogantly taunts Zeb that he can find the medical supplies they need faster than he can, and it's just the two being douchebags to each other again. Chopper, who was left by himself, is deactivated by the probe droid, who then violently searches him. Don't ask me what this is supposed to be in droid terms. Chopper conveniently is able to signal for help, in which Ezra and Sabine tail back to go find him, and come across, what do you know, another villain of the season. Ezra at first assumes it's a bounty hunter, until it turns out that, nope, it's another Inquisitor. Now, to bring the review to another halt, I have to point out how they killed off the Grand Inquisitor, but him being the Grand Inquisitor was a retcon, because when we first meet him, he calls himself the Inquisitor. Then when genius writer Filoni killed him off, I guess he struggled to come up with a new villain that could top him. So what did he do? Create 2 new Inquisitors to take his place, of course. This is almost like George Lucas and the second Death Star. Well, back to the episode, Ezra and Sabine opt to run, but then bump into the 5th brother as well. And they're able to pin Ezra with the help of the newly introduced Inquisitor's probe droids. We see her and the 5th brother arguing on what to do with Ezra, until it's decided that Ezra will be used as bait to draw in other Jedi. Okay, but why not just kill him? I mean, you can just execute him, then deal with any Jedi that come after him, right? Nah, just keep him alive because plot armor is a thing. Well, anyways, the new Inquisitor unmasks herself, and we see that she is the 7th sister, voiced by Sarah Michelle Gellar, who, like Freddie Prinze Jr., played a character in the live-action Scooby-Doo movie.
What the?
Hey. I can look at myself naked.
Oh, brother.
And she's also his wife.
Ironic.
Okay, she is known for other shit, like the television series Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which earned the 7th sister the nickname Buffy the Jedi Slayer, but you know what name I prefer? Buffy the creepy would-be Jedi Slayer if she wasn't so fucking useless, because she doesn't slay a single Jedi in the show, and if she has in the comics, I didn't read them, and it's too little, too late. Sort of like a certain someone who I'm surprised isn't in this show, given the amount of fan service present. When I say Buffy is creepy, she is. While she isn't actually bad looking for a dark lady of the Sith, the way she inappropriately touches Ezra and has no sense of personal space, I have to wonder if she's got a thing for Ezra, which is not a pleasant thought. But the way she touches him and gets up close, it's incredibly uncomfortable to watch. I guess Dave Filoni thought there wasn't enough gender equality in underage kids who get touched by adults after it happened to Ahsoka. So I guess Ezra's gotta have suppressed memories too.
Obi-Wan, we meet again. What part of stay 50 yards away at all times don't you understand? Uh-oh.
Well, anyways, 7th Sister's got Ezra captured, and he does nothing to try and escape. I'm just gonna say firsthand that you're not gonna top the Grand Inquisitor in threat level. This show sloppily writing in new characters really hurt its potential. So we cut to the 5th brother searching around. He stops the thermal detonator trap and deflects it back at Sabine and Zeb, in which Sabine is knocked down, and he decides not to kill her. Instead, he picks her up and carries her on his shoulder, and tells the probe droid to, quote, "Do as you will," to Zeb. I really hate the squandered opportunities the villains have to kill the good guys. Zeb struggles a tiny bit with destroying the probes, but after that, he's home free. And he even finds the supplies along the way. To show how useless the 7th sister is, she's unable to break through Ezra. I remember how the 3rd sister in particular failed to break through a 10-year-old Leia, so I imagine Inquisitors don't have very good interrogation powers. The 7th sister almost comes across like she's trying to seduce Ezra, and she even says, quote, "As pretty as you are, I only need you alive. That doesn't mean in one piece." Like, Jesus Christ. This probably might have worked if Ezra was actually an adult. At this point, he should have been at least 18 when the show started, along with Sabine. And this scene might have actually worked. Instead, we get this highly inappropriate interaction between Ezra and the 7th sister. Now, having a seductive, manipulative villain is fine, as I noted how Darth Xana was much like that. Key difference is that Darth Xana didn't try to seduce children. But anyways, at least Buffy didn't try to unzip Ezra's pants. We cut to Zeb finding Chopper downed on the ground, and explains everything that's happened after he was out. Anyways, Sabine and fifth brother join the party, and we further see how useless Buffy is when she politely asks Ezra to share information on his allies, and he of course says no. Ezra, being completely unintimidated, tells me that the Seventh Sister has been more concerned with flirtation than torture. You know, if the fifth brother had killed Sabine and then threw her dead body in front of Ezra, that might have been enough to break him, but since these Inquisitors are gonna go easy on him, it just makes the conflict non-existent. What am I supposed to be worried about? There's a scene where Zeb contacts the captured pair on a comlink and tries to speak to them in code while the Inquisitors are listening in. Yeah, that's where Ezra is forced to tell Zeb to bring in Kanan and Ahsoka, and so on. Both the Inquisitors bring the pair to the hangar, and Ezra notices Zeb on top of the hangar, and manages to get Sabine to notice too without alerting the Inquisitors, which is completely impossible to believe, and the ambush goes on without much trouble. Zeb picks them both up, and while there is a struggle by both Inquisitors, Zeb is able to blast away, and we see how truly useless these two Inquisitors are. They failed to eliminate their enemies, and now they presumably have to report back to Lord Vader. Who fucking Rey? The three, once back at the Rebel fleet, tell the other main characters on the crazy adventure they just went through. Although at this point, it's laughable that they treat the Inquisitors as anything but a nuisance that just slow things down. And that's the episode. In this slow-ass drag, let's just get on with the next episode. Episode 6, as we've still got a long way to go. So this particular episode has Ezra practice with Rex to fire blasters, but then Kanan comes in telling him that he's missing his Jedi training. There's a brief scuffle with Ezra venting that he can't be in two places at once, but then Sabine calls the three of them inside as Hera has a little group meeting. This meeting is basically just a plot device to get Ezra alone with Chopper. Commander Sato asks the Ghost Crew to find some generators to provide humanitarian aid to some residents on an ice world, something nobody cares about. And Ezra isn't allowed to go with everyone else because he was asked to clean something on the ship twice by Hera, and until he does that, he doesn't get to go on this mission. We continue to see Chopper be the most douchey droid in the universe. Seriously, if I had to make a list of the worst droid characters in Star Wars, Chopper might be a top runner on that list. He isn't helpful or funny, and he causes problems for every member of the Ghost Crew. And he's voiced by Dave Filoni. Yeah, you didn't know that, did you? Now that I think about it, his Oscar-worthy performance is probably a key reason why I hate Chopper so much. My subconscious recognized that Filoni was always there in the show somewhere. Anyways, the second the Ghost Crew leave, there's a distress signal, given by a ship known as the Broken Horn. Ezra recognizes the signal as Vizago's ship. So wait, did Vizago literally name the ship after the fact that he broke one of his horns? That's like if Luke, after he lost his hand, named his X-Wing the Amputated Hand. Also, it's not a good title in the slightest. Sounds unintimidating if we're being honest. Ezra drops everything he's doing, reasoning that he owes Vizago a favor anyways. Ezra, despite being shown with no piloting experience, easily adapts to flying the Phantom, which is pretty lazy writing. Chopper could have just flown the Phantom. He's essentially Hera's co-pilot, right? And conveniently, he finds Vizago's ship overhead. Since Lothal is locked down, I just want to say how convenient it is that Vizago hangs around here, and that he was very close to where the Ghost is. Small galaxy, I must say. Yeah, that's another problem. The galaxy feels tiny in this show. Ezra tries to contact Vizago, but there's no answer. So he decides to board the ship, and it's all dark and empty. And to add to the attempted horror atmosphere, a door closes behind Ezra but in front of Chopper, splitting them up. And conveniently, this splitting up leads to Chopper finding exactly what the Ghost Crew needed. Ezra meanwhile doesn't look where he's going and bumps into a disabled droid. And he comes face to face with a certain someone in the cockpit. And to be honest, I actually smiled. The only Clone Wars character that is actually worth a shit, we are reintroduced to Hondo Ohnaka. Yeah, they do not waste his return actually. His personality remains consistent. And the one problem I have, as a matter of fact, is his design. He looks way too skinny, and it's like he's been malnourished in between the Clone Wars and Rebels. But still, the personality and writing remains the same, and given Hondo was one of the few consistently enjoyable things about the Clone Wars, I have a huge sigh of relief that he wasn't downgraded in quality, like the droids. So when asked, Hondo explains that Vizago bet the ship in a game of Sabacc and lost, and now it's his ship, along with his droids and whatnot. Ezra, reluctant to trust Hondo, lies that his name is Lando Calrissian. I thought it was kind of weird that he'd used the name of a well-known smuggler, and in fact, Hondo has heard of Lando, but never seen his face. Hondo also explains that he's looking for a ship crew, but Ezra declines as he's already part of a crew elsewhere. And we get a line of dialogue where Hondo explains that he's lost his pirate gang to the Empire. Gee, the Empire actually being a threat and leaving you up shit creek? I never thought I'd see the day in the show. To anyone in the Clone Wars, we see how better off Hondo is in the Clone Wars than Rebels. In the Clone Wars, he wasn't a one-man party and had much resources to do stuff. That's the reason he was able to deliver weapons in the Onderon arc. But here, we see he's more limited in what he can do since losing his gang. Out of all the returning characters, Hondo actually has the best representation of what happened to him. Moving on, an Imperial transport attacks the Broken Horn, but there's no tension, since Chopper comes in and fixes the hyperdrive and jumps to lightspeed without punching in coordinates. So realistically, they plow right into a star because of this massive oversight in writing, but they're fine in the very next scene. So since the Broken Horn is carrying generators that the Rebels were established as needing so badly, when Hondo asks Ezra for help on a transaction, Ezra agrees to a share of 2 of the generators and splitting the profit made from a third. Predictably, this is going to cause some problems. Landing on a random barren planet with a station in the middle of nowhere, and who else would the buyer be but that slob from season 1? Yeah, that's right, he's back. And he's just as slimy as ever. The slob decides he's going to take the supplies by force, and since there's a bounty on Hondo's head, he intends to collect that too. Also, Ezra gets unmasked, and his identity is exposed, since Fat Slob remembers him from Lando's farm. At first, Hondo thinks it's obvious because he still thinks Ezra is Lando, and upon being told otherwise, he affirms that he likes Ezra more despite being lied to. So there's this action sequence where not much happens. Ezra retrieves his weapons and starts shooting. Basically, to sum everything up, Fat Slob gets away, and Hondo almost gets sucked into space, but is fortunately saved by Ezra, although he reveals his force training. But anyways, having their big score since they kept all the generators, Ezra, Hondo, and Chopper celebrate. But then a strange twist happens. Ezra's surprised to see Vizago, learns that Hondo just stole his ship and locked him away. So Vizago calls in the favor Ezra owes him. When I heard that the favor Ezra owes would amount to this, I was kind of expecting something more difficult, but I guess the writers didn't want to challenge themselves, so Ezra frees Vizago and they're even. So yeah, Vizago goes to confront Hondo, and Ezra flip-flops between whose side he's on, but to make a long story short, Hondo steals the Phantom, and Vizago is livid at Ezra. So he jettisons him and Chopper out in an escape pod, remarking how he hates children. Yeah, so things were made way too easy for Ezra. I was expecting a super tough favor Vizago to ask Ezra, but instead, it's something piss easy that happens in an episode where Vizago isn't present for most of the episode. So this was contrived as hell. But the highlight, I'd say, is Hondo's return. His personality remains intact, with any changes being minor or barely noticeable, except for his design, of course. Anyways, turns out the Phantom isn't lost forever. It was on autopilot headed back to the Ghost, and now everyone isn't pissed at Ezra anymore because he found those darn generators the Rebels needed. So everything's in actuality resolved, and there's no lasting consequence, and Ezra and Hondo leave on good terms. And that was episode 6. As you can tell, we're nowhere near the end. So the next episode is pretty lame. It basically starts with the rebels intending to give aid to a blockaded planet and give them resources. Surprisingly, the Imperial fleet is smaller than usual. The blockade doesn't include anything like a Star Destroyer. I guess that would make things too hard to write around. Gee, why does it feel like the writing always has this sense of giving up high stakes or big threats? Yeah, so the Imperial blockade is admittingly small and not that intimidating. Yet the rebel fleet is still easily overwhelmed with only 3 ships, including the Ghost, surviving when Hera gives the order to retreat. So yeah, how are they going to get past that blockade? Well, apparently there's this lone mechanic who's building something called a B-Wing, and Kanan volunteers Hera to go get the B-Wing. Since this is a straight up filler episode, Kanan's flying the Ghost trying to figure out a way past the Imperial blockade. Meanwhile, Hera, Sabine and Zeb dick around the mechanic's place and testing out the B-Wing before using it to blast through the blockade. Now, something I wanted to talk about is that we're given no reason why the world in this episode is being blockaded, and why the Empire didn't just blast it from orbit and glass it. Earlier, it was established that opposing the Empire will just have the Empire become even more brutal as retaliation. So what happened to that exactly? Because to me, the Empire pulls a lot of its punches, and that's why they, as antagonists, are weak. They have limits on how cruel they can be, and that just doesn't make for a scary villainous faction. So I may have quickly summarized episode 7, but believe me, there's nothing to it. It's filthy filler. So let's just skip right on to episode 8, which, wouldn't you know it, is a Sabine-focused episode. This is basically the first one we're getting since that short with her easily outdoing Imperials and making them look like incompetent fools. In this episode, Hera sends Sabine on a mission, in which Ezra and Chopper have the quote-unquote privilege of being her backup. Ezra's annoying crush on Sabine is very obvious, as he blabbers on about random shit to Sabine about how he spends time alone and eats alone and blah 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 blah. Despite this being a trait of Ezra having a thing for Sabine, there also seems to be a lot of times the writers forget that it exists. And if I hadn't emphasized this before, their relationship goes absolutely nowhere. It just remains static of Ezra being an infatuated moron. Anyways, they're supposed to meet up with a courier and remark the catchphrase, "It's a long way to Alderaan." And the two embarrass themselves saying the catchphrase to random people, and then sometime later, which I'm going to assume is 5 hours for comedic effect, they're about to give up, when it turns out the courier is a binary droid. I don't know why the pair would have no idea who or what the courier is and where to start looking, but soon afterwards, a bounty hunter shows up. Bloody perfect. And better yet, it's someone Sabine recognizes. Kestu Onyo. So yeah, during this conversation, Ezra just ruins any potential tension by asking Sabine random questions and receives no answer, as Sabine just ignores him. Eventually some stormtroopers show up, and during all this, I'd like to say that Ezra does very little to help. In fact, just as Sabine and Ezra are about to take off with the droid, almost home free, Ezra gets shot off and falls off the ship as it takes off. Yeah, so this episode was deliberately designed to have Ezra written out for the most part, because the focus is on Sabine. Honestly, I don't know why this wasn't just a mission Sabine did by herself. She wouldn't be any more of a Mary Sue at this point, so what's the harm? On the other hand, Sabine's bounty hunter friend Kestu is surrounded by stormtroopers, and despite killing multiple of them, the stormtroopers squander the opportunity to fire and execute her. She, in return, doesn't even crush the stormtroopers. She just gives them minor injuries at best. Maybe the same as having someone slip on a banana peel. So when Sabine gets into orbit above the planet, Ketsu is not very hard behind, and contacts her that she give up the binary droid. And this I'm not surprised by, but Chopper sneaks on board Ketsu's ship and deactivates the weaponry on her ship, and Sabine takes the opportunity to escape, but being pursued by Kestu, she uses a tractor beam to grab Chopper and forces Sabine to come to the negotiating table. Throughout all of this, I just didn't care. I can't quite put my finger on what it is, but Sabine is a character I don't give two shits about. It probably contributed to my lack of caring. Something I find weird is when Sabine and Ketsu dock their ships together, they don't just have a duel to the death and be done with it. There's even this baffling moment where Ketsu takes her bloody helmet off, because I guess the writers just wanted to show us what this bitch looks like, despite it being completely out of place. It's this black chick who tries to cut a deal with Sabine, and at this point, I thought this show had them try to kill each other at the start. Sabine actually references that she was essentially stabbed in the back and left for dead by her, and this is absolutely an abrupt 180 just because. So based on how this episode was presented to us, I'd especially imagine both characters to gun each other down. I also don't like how Chopper stands directly behind Ketsu, and doesn't give her an electric shock or something. Both characters just dropping their guard is pathetic. Half the time, I forgot Sabine was even supposed to be a Mandalorian. Anyways, to make a long story short, the Imperials show up, and the two team up to make it out alive. Of course.
Ah, stop eating our boat, Jaws.
Rawr, I'm gonna eat your boat, and then I'm gonna eat you guys. Rawr! Oh my god, what's that?
It's bigger, Jaws.
Oh my god, now we have a common enemy. We have to work together.
This trope seems to be done a lot in kids' shows. One example I can think of is Transformers. We are meeting Ketsu in this very episode, and the show talks like we're expected to know who she is. I'd also like to point out that the writing is so fucking bland. They're basically telling us what's going on instead of showing us. I picked up in writing advice videos that it's okay to tell instead of show in certain instances. The dialogue is super paper thin. This just makes the episode so uninteresting. Well, they evade Imperial forces, and now they're friends again. Like most of Disney's Star Wars, it's not earned. They sort of just brush Ketsu's betrayal under the rug, and that's the episode. I guess they just wanted a character to use for later. Pathetic, lazy writing. Next episode. So Ezra and Commander Sato go out on a mission to search for a group of missing rebels, whom the main fleet lost contact with. Okay, something I wanted to emphasize is just like the Clone Wars, they do a piss poor job of mapping out the war. The entirety of Star Wars Rebels, I'd say, focuses heavily on the formation of the rebellion. But you'd think they would have showed us where the rebellion came from. And even if it's only from the perspective of the Ghost Crew, show us a conflict progress towards a full-out war, and the Empire valuing the rebels more and more as a threat. They just drop us into a scenario and expect us to follow along. I wish this show was more reactive and less standalone. It seems Filoni's problem is that he just can't get events to clearly lead into another, with cause and effect after another. I wish there was more reactive writing, instead of making the whole thing self-contained episodes of X random conflict that doesn't connect to any other episode. I don't know what state the Rebel Alliance is, nor the Galactic Empire. The most of a clue we have is that the Galactic Empire has the advantage, and that's it. Why they have the advantage, beyond overwhelming numbers, I couldn't tell you. Like, seriously, could they not have the consequences of one episode play into another? If the Rebels sustain heavy losses, they could at least show us the Rebels recovering come the next few episodes. One of my favorite examples of a story with reactive writing is the movie Die Hard. The stakes are confined to one building in Los Angeles and not an entire galaxy, but it completely feels like a lived-in world, with John McClane and the T-Words actively and consistently trying to thwart each other. When the T-Words roll into the building and take everyone hostage, John McClane escapes onto another floor, and uses his problem-solving skills to warn authorities. When he realizes the nearby telephone doesn't work, he instead pulls over the fire alarm, but the T-Word leader Hans Gruber is quick to act, calling off the fire department as a false alarm. And this also leads to them learning that someone must have pulled off the fire alarm in an attempt to get the authorities on the premises. So Hans sends one of his goons to the area where the fire alarm was pulled. This is where John McClane is forced to hide, and after a fight with the T-Word in question, they fall down the stairs where the T-Word snaps his neck and dies, which leads to John now having a machine gun. You see what I mean? One event leads to another in a super reactive movie. And the whole movie is like this, where everything is interconnected and well thought out. If you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. Now, Star Wars, since it takes place over the course of many years, doesn't have that much of reactive writing. But there still is a cause and effect, with each part of the saga leading into another. Like A New Hope leads directly into Empire Strikes Back, with the Empire striking back at the Rebels after they blew up the Death Star. there's always a cause and effect. Right until the end with Return of the Jedi. And even if you get into the EU, the Thrawn trilogy does the same thing. Wait, did I say Thrawn? Well, anyways, their ship gets stopped in mid-hyperspace by an Imperial Star Destroyer with a hyperspace jamming attachment. And yep, they're captured. But since Commander Sato managed to send a distress signal, the Ghost crew get the message. And Sabine talks about when she was at the Imperial Academy, they were developing a gravity well that could rip ships out of hyperspace. Despite knowing what the threat is the best, Sabine doesn't come along to the rescue mission. Instead, Hera rejects the prospect of everyone coming along. Instead, Kanan will partner up with Rex and Chopper. When I was rewatching this episode, I realized it was just a shitty excuse for Kanan and Rex to have a bonding episode. Yeah, like this is the time to have a crappy bonding episode. Anyways, cut to Commander Sato and Ezra being escorted to the Imperial Commander. Don't even ask where the Rebel extras are, because they don't matter. Only the named characters have plot armor. So yeah, only Commander Sato and Ezra have a presence for the rest of the episode. The Rebel extras? Who knows? Who cares where they are? Okay, they do show up later, but they don't do anything. The Imperial Commander expresses glee that they've captured 2 high-value targets, and you'd think he'd be extra careful to lock the 2 away in a secure location. I hope. As the episode goes on, you see that the Empire has super lax security. We cut back to Kanan and Rex arguing with each other. And then Zeb brings in 2 stormtroopers that he knocked out for disguises, as well as Sabine stealing an Imperial shuttle. The stolen items are pretty much presented to the good guys from the get-go. And Kanan even remarks, and I quote,
"How is it the Empire lets us keep stealing these things?"
And at this point, it was my 500th scoff in a row watching this show. Another case of just making things super easy for the good guys. Why can't the writers ever challenge themselves? So Kanan and Rex, after some more arguing, come in front of the Gravity Well Star Destroyer. And they're easily able to get on board the Star Destroyer because of the fact that Rex says that he and Cody practically invented the clearance codes during the Clone Wars. Yeah, that's pretty lazy writing. That they haven't switched codes by now, despite it being over 20 years. Wouldn't the Empire think the whole thing was open to heavy abuse if it wasn't swapped out in 20 years? When the trio shuttle is cleared to dock, we cut to the Imperial Commander being contacted by Agent Kallus, who informs the Commander not to underestimate Ezra Bridger, and to increase the guard on him 3-fold. Does the Commander listen to the advice? Not really. So Kanan and Rex enter the Star Destroyer and sneak around in their disguises. Anyhow, Ezra is being escorted by only 3 pissing stormtroopers, and is easily able to overpower them, and lock them all up in the cell they were going to lock Ezra in. Does that mean when Agent Kallus informed the Commander to increase the guard 3-fold, that it meant that there was only going to be 1 stormtrooper escorting him otherwise? I'm just thinking back to the first 2 episodes of the whole series, where Ezra easily tricked 2 stormtroopers into letting him free. Then Kanan and Rex show up in disguise, and Ezra, thinking that they're real stormtroopers, fires some non-lethal rounds into them with his blaster. It's lucky that Ezra's blaster was set to stun, otherwise they'd be fucking dead. Anyways, we get this corny moment where Ezra lies that there was a huge firefight, until Chopper reveals otherwise. And the 2 are pissed at him, but they've got no time to argue, because it's time to go get Commander Sato. So yeah, it's a huge firefight, where Ezra and Chopper try to get the ship to self-destruct, while Kanan and Rex free Sato and the boys. To sum all this up, Rex gets captured briefly, in which the Imperial Commander starts grandstanding Rex for fighting with traitors, and blah blah. He offers Rex the chance to rejoin the Empire if he surrenders, but he of course refuses, so the Needle droid opts to torture him instead. Kanan senses his suffering through the Force, and in perhaps the most out-of-character moment for Kanan, he goes out of his way to save Rex. This happens for no other reason than Filoni wanting Rex to be in Return of the Jedi. It's a lack of earning anything. Also, something that's utterly baffling is how is the Rebel ship still intact for Commander Sato, Ezra, and friends to escape on? I expected an Imperial shuttle to be the escape route, but sure as hell not a goddamn rebel ship. Okay, let's assume that they wanted to scan the rebel ship to try and trace it back to the fleet. But in that case, why in the hell didn't they drain the fuel? You know what? It doesn't matter at this point. They easily escape, and Chopper sabotaged the Star Destroyer by dragging in every ship, including those belonging to the Empire, which gives the rebel ship the leeway to escape. And they pretty much wrap this episode with Rex and Kanan making up with each other, and the two salute each other, and that's the end. It's an ending given without being earned. But since this video is bound to be long, let's just get into the next episode. Episode 10 concerns another pointless conflict with the Inquisitors. We start with a civilian transport being boarded by the two Inquisitors of the season. We've already met them before. So anyways, they take a Force-sensitive child by force. Yeah, I'm guessing that this episode's Clone Wars counterpart was the one with Cad Bane in the Jedi holocron. Even if that's not the case, it does feel pretty similar. So basically the conflict of this episode are the Inquisitors taking Force-sensitive kids to prevent them from becoming Jedi. This is also where Ahsoka enters the show again. I'm pretty convinced that Filoni's treating her like this ultra important character that you're supposed to bow down and worship. It's not explained how Ahsoka knows about the specific kidnappings of Force-sensitive kids in this episode. There's no scene of the Ghost Crew getting intel on the Inquisitors' whereabouts or anything. We're dropped into the episode with Ahsoka knowing about the Inquisitors' recent activities. Anyways, Kanan, Ezra, and Zeb are sent on a mission to some unspecified planet to find a Force-sensitive child before the Inquisitors do. Kanan and Ezra split up with Zeb and Chopper, and the latter pair find the kid from the very start of the episode. The Inquisitors just left a baby in their TIE fighters. So Zeb and Chopper take them back to the Phantom, in which Chopper stays to take care of the child. Meanwhile, Ezra and Kanan go into some residential district or something, and come across an Ithorian parent or something, who says that their child was taken by Inquisitors. I found it incredibly weird that the Inquisitors left witnesses behind, because when we cut to Ahsoka, she finds the woman from the start of the episode the sole survivor of the Inquisitors' massacre. Out of all the people the Inquisitors spared, it was ironically the guardian of the child they were kidnapping. I suppose this was only done so that there would be someone alive to give much needed info to the good guys. Anyways, after finding the second child, Zeb grabs the kid and is pursued by those darn Inquisitors. For some reason, Zeb is able to somewhat outrun them, which is plain silly. The two sense the presence of the good guys in this one building, and at least the seventh sister is dispatching a probe droid as a lookout in case they decide to exit out. Although the probe droid doesn't detect Ezra and Kanan entering the building, and the episode basically is evading the Inquisitors. The big problem is that the toddler just won't shut up. And this is where the good guys realize the children are Force sensitive. There's this really stupid part where the fifth brother is tricked by a comlink recording of the baby crying its arse off, which doesn't help the underwhelming nature of these villains. To make a long story short, this episode essentially has Ezra escape with the child, in which the probe droid overhears a remark made to the little one about one of the ghost hideouts. I hope that's a Chekhov's gun for a later episode. Kanan and Zeb jump out a window on a higher floor and land on some dude's speeder, with the Inquisitors in hot pursuit. We get a questionable fight scene, in which the Inquisitors have several perfect opportunities to kill the good guys, but waste it every single time. The one that stood out to me is when the fifth brother uses Force grip on Kanan, and the seventh sister, instead of taking the opportunity to impale him, instead goes for a high kick attack. Both sides are on the offensive, and they just waste the opportunity every time. I guess this is an additional reason why the animation is so lackluster. It's because whoever animated this show had no clue how to choreograph fights effectively. If you remember this show well enough, you know this is where a certain Filoni fetish character makes her entrance. Yeah, that's right. Ahsoka comes in, ignites her lightsabers, which I guess you're supposed to be wowed at her silver blades if you're a filthy casual. Big deal. They were in Knights of the Old Republic 2 as well. Still, Giving Ahsoka a unique color for Disney canon seems to be a decision made to make her seem special. As I've said, Filoni is super obsessed with making her pivotal to a saga she was never in. When she confronts the Inquisitors, the music pumps the fuck on, and I guess you're expected to clap like a seal. This is also on top of the fact that Ahsoka wrecks the shit out of the Inquisitors. She literally goes to town on them, and despite having the perfect opportunity to kill the Seventh Sister, she just draws a blade in front of her and says that she's beaten. That's another thing. The show doesn't feel like the named characters are trying to kill each other. Hell, even with some of the stormtroopers and Zeb, he doesn't seem to whack them hard enough to kill them. It's more like they're just boxing each other. It's like watching the UFC or something. Ahsoka's skill was OP in the Clone Wars, and her skill is OP here. Something I'd like to point out is that Ahsoka is only a pissing 3 years older than Kanan, yet Kanan is nowhere near her level. And that's weird. You'd expect Ahsoka to be at least 5 years older than Kanan or something. And given the lacking quality standards of Filoni, thinking it's okay for children to participate in battles, and how it's all good fun and games. Anakin was a child soldier by accident and circumstance. Qui-Gon intended to keep a watchful eye over Anakin during the Battle of Naboo, and wisely told him to stay in the cockpit. That's the key difference. And even with something like Knights of the Old Republic, you could at least say that Mission Vale was not an official member of the Republic Army, but rather part of the Ebon Hawk crew. Ahsoka is an overpowered Mary Sue who would have died the moment she went up against someone like Grievous or Asajj Ventress, but she managed to beat both of them. Now, the fifth brother and the seventh sister have been portrayed as mostly useless, but in that case, I don't understand how Kanan and Ezra combined can't beat the both of them. Like, the fifth brother and the seventh sister also are not effective at working together, and are more competitive than anything. It may be the nature of the Sith to be self-serving and independent, but often this sort of writing comes at the detriment of the characters as villains who challenge the heroes. It just leads to the good guys easily getting away. I'm starting to notice a pattern of incompetent bad guys versus the cool, hip, good guys. Commonly in a story, villains are more memorable. Not in this story though. This show has this whole vibe of rebels rule, and that it's piss easy to overthrow an evil empire. You just gotta believe. Man, that is such a Disney message, isn't it? It's exactly like the thought that training is for pussies, when it's actually an incredibly important factor in one's usage of the Force. So to make a super dragged out story short, Ahsoka jumps on the transport and gets away. The children are safe, and they don't even establish what's gonna happen to them. It's just, there's no Jedi order to keep them safe, and that's it. And we get a cliffhanger with the recording of Ezra mentioning the planet they hang out on. So that's something to be excited for. Yeah, so I wish something this show emphasized more was maintaining secrecy and doing your best to not be tracked by the Empire. Otherwise the whole thing is doomed. I mean, the whole thing against the Empire should be rigged, given the Empire has an insane advantage of numbers and resources. So now let's go to episode 11, in which we've almost reached the halfway point, in which Ezra has a vision in his sleep concerning his parents. When I saw that, I was like, oh great, this again. In which it's that whole mystery thing of looking into the future and whatnot. The thing is though, I wish it was better written. It really just feels like an excuse to go back to Lothal than anything. I remember with Anakin's visions, in Attack of the Clones, his vision of his mother's suffering actually played an important role. And not only was he too late to save his mother, he also basked in anger and revenge by killing those savages who brutalized her. We see that he's greatly saddened by what happened, and he's not sure why he did what he did, killing those Tusken Raiders out of sheer rage. He swears that he will be powerful enough to stop those he cares about from dying. Then in the next movie, when he gets a vision of Padme suffering during labor, he pays extra attention to that. And the unsatisfactory advice from Master Yoda forces him to find other options, i.e. Palpatine. Palpatine offers him the power to save Padme, and Anakin starts wondering whether or not Palpatine is his best bet. Plus, his choice to betray the Jedi by slicing Mace Windu's hand was a split-second decision. But here, I don't know what the point is. I mean, the last time Ezra had a Force vision, it also concerned his parents. But not much happened besides the senator guy turning out to be an Imperial spy. Speaking of, What the hell happened to him? Because in the next episode after that, they paint the senator as, oh, I was just protesting peacefully, and he never pops up again. You'd think they'd eventually meet again, and the senator would receive his just punishment for his deception. Even though I've only read the first 18 issues, I also recall the Force vision the Jedi Covenant had in the KOTOR comics also had huge consequences, where once the vision was given, it couldn't be unseen, and the Covenant took the drastic measure of slaughtering their own Padawans, just to ensure the Sith wouldn't return. And did it work? No. Because it was an irrational move made out of fear. Because Revan and Malak would eventually build a Sith Empire, as seen in Knights of the Old Republic the game. You'd think that Ezra having a vision of the future would have huge consequences like the two stories I described. I remember in the Clone Wars, when Ahsoka had a vision of Padme being taken out by Aurra Sing, that it wasn't treated like a major development for Ahsoka's character, like it probably should have been. Because Ahsoka resolves everything by the end, and there's no lasting consequences. Which of course is a problem with the Filoni-verse. It's a lack of earning anything. I can't believe I've managed to keep my sanity intact through all the shit I've watched. Seriously, could the story earn itself for once? Well anyways, in the vision, he meets a Loth cat, which is symbolism for something I guess. As soon as he wakes up, he runs straight to Kanan and Hera, and tells them about the vision with his parents. And this is where Hera speaks to Ezra about how she and Kanan tried to track Ezra's parents. But out of the 1,000 systems they could be in, not a single one of them could be narrowed down. Now I don't know about you, but just like the SIBO shit, this is probably a moment that feels the closest to being sincere. I don't know. They play this scene dead serious, and it actually works for once, with Ezra giving Hera a genuine thank you, and it feels real because in context, he's learnt that she's tried extra hard to find his parents, with little to no luck, but not without trying at the end of the day. I said in the first season review that it seems when they try to play a scene dead serious, without quips or jokes or dramatic shit going on, it's genuine. It reminds me of that scene with Luke Skywalker in Battlefront 2 EA, a scene which is one of the only good ones in the game. Like for context, not even the most hardcore Disney Star Wars defenders try to defend that game's story, and everyone agrees that it was an utter failure. In that scene, it was a real, genuine conversation between Luke and Del. They wrote Luke how you'd expect, and he's not played up for, oh my god, it's Luke Skywalker, like in The Mandalorian. I'm thinking that Disney Star Wars ironically needs more scenes where they just let the characters be themselves without anything crazy going on. The original saga had plenty of scenes in between the big spectacle pieces, and they worked quite well, because so far, it seems like this is where Star Wars Rebels is at its best, when it's not quipping or having overblown action scenes that account for jack shit. Anyways, let's talk about the rest of the episode. The bad guys, including Agent Kallus, have a meeting where they discuss the leak of a rebel presence on Gorel, and decide to deploy forces to Gorel. There is this moment where the Seventh Sister tells Agent Kallus that she notices that he has a noticeable admiration for the rebels, and Kallus doesn't directly respond, instead stating with their combined efforts, they may be able to catch the rebels. I actually kinda like subtlety like this. While I do think it's laughable that Agent Kallus hasn't been demoted, fired, or killed at this point, I really like the hint that Kallus is impressed that the rebels who got away like 50 times at this point continue to outdo him, and he respects that. Like, this is someone who has no care for his stormtrooper underlings. This heavily implies that he thinks his backup is useless or ineffective. In a better show, this could greatly characterize Kallus as a villain. A lot of villains can have admiration for the hero. One example that comes to mind is Syndrome from The Incredibles, who despite his arrogance and bitterness, still holds a tad lot of admiration for Mr. Incredible. I don't know. I think Kallus had the potential to be a likable villain, similar to Hans Gruber, or Nolan vs. Joker. In fact, if I ever get around to a Rebels rewrite, I'll keep Kallus around for my rewrite because I see a lot of potential. We cut back to Ezra looking at the picture of his parents, and upon sliding down, Kanan gets Ezra to search through a list of Imperial detainees, encouraging him to use the Force to let it guide him, and he pinpoints one Imperial prisoner. Realizing that they have to go to Lothal to meet this prisoner, whom Hera says there was a prison breakout on Lothal, so Ezra might be onto something. And the Ghost crew all openly offer to help. Although something weird is that they mention that Lothal isn't fully blockaded by Imperial Star Destroyers anymore. And the crew realize through Zeb that there aren't any stormtroopers anywhere on Gorel, indicating the Empire's up to something. This makes the Empire feel smaller than it should be. That for a full-scale assault on Gorel, they gotta move their Star Destroyers. Really puts the scale into question, doesn't it? Anyways, Ezra and Kanan go to get Zeb the moment the Imperial forces show up, and they have this shitty fake out where they're pinned down, but all it takes is Ezra using his lightsaber and the Force, and so they're not overwhelmed anymore. Alright? Was the show just pretending they were being overwhelmed just because? And again, another missed opportunity to execute Agent Kallus, who was down and unconscious. You'd think Zeb in particular would take that opportunity, but nope, he just stands in the background during all this. The Inquisitors also show up, and Ezra's prepared to strike at them, until Kanan shuts the door through a blaster shot, and they have this bullshit conversation about Ezra's obsession with getting to Lothal to find out what happened to his folks. Anyways, they've wasted enough time as the Rebel fleet is ready to depart, which I'm surprised to see Commander Sato and Captain Rex here. Do the Rebels just hide out on the same place if they're refueling? Seems kinda risky. At least the Ghost provides a distraction, while Kanan and Ezra depart on the Phantom. The Rebels' fleet being attacked, and the Imperials even have the capital Rebel ship in a tractor beam. Although the Ghost crashes onto the tractor beam in order to get the capital ship free. It sounds incredibly stupid, but I guess in context, they were running out of ideas, and losing the capital ship would not be ideal. Anyways, the Phantom makes it all the way to Lothal, which is completely unguarded, which is pretty darn lazy. Something I like to ask is whether or not the Empire value the Rebels as a threat, or if Agent Kallus and the Inquisitors are the only ones assigned to the task of hunting down Rebels, and the rest of the Empire couldn't be fucked. It's not really explained on how much the Empire values the Rebels as enemies. Is it a threat they're underestimating, or are they doing everything they can to stamp it out? That's some world building I'd like to be explored. You'd think for an origin story of the rebellion, they'd do that. Anyways, Ezra and Kanan decide to go back to Ezra's presumably burnt out home, in which they see there's practically little left. Ezra reaches out and the Loth cat shows up, and Ezra follows it around to a dude on a speeder bike. The guy speeds away, but Ezra apparently put a tracker on the Loth cat. So it's here where we meet this guy, Ryder Azadi, who knows exactly what happened to Ezra's parents. So after all this build-up, you want to know what Ryder says once they camp in for the night? Well, Ezra's parents died in the prison escape.
And it's gone.
Yeah, a simple, albeit lame answer. Although Ryder makes a point about how they heard Ezra's message to Lothal at the end of Season 1. It's played as like, they knew it was you, Ezra. They knew right away it was you. And Ezra appropriately sobs away after the confirmation that his parents are dead and gone forever. Gee, I know I said the answer was lame, but as the scene goes on, they actually kind of sell the cold reality. So I'd say it's a scene that starts off making you go bleh, but then you get invested by the time it ends. The final scene also has nice ominous music, where Ezra remembers his parents, and how he has made them proud posthumously. Is it earned? Not really. I don't really remember a transition of loner Ezra to selfless rebel Ezra. Anyways, Kanan discusses with Ezra how his parents will live inside him, and that's the episode. And good thing they didn't cut to abrupt happy music. Alright, now that we're more than halfway through the season, we can catch a breather. Jeez, I've had a lot to say, haven't I? Well, the nightmare, I'm sad to say, is only halfway done. The episode afterwards is called A Princess on Lothal, and the moment I heard that, I was sweating bullets. Apparently the setup for this episode is having Senator Organa send reinforcements to Lothal after the rebel fleet got half crushed at Gorel. And it's a mission that will get Ezra to take his mind off his parents. We cut to 3 ships jumping out of hyperspace, and their designs ripped straight from Knights of the Old Republic. But I guess the dishonor actually goes to Rogue One first, for ripping off the designs. Well, anyways, this is where we're introduced to Leia Organa, acting like she's got relief supplies for the citizens of Lothal and blah blah. I knew I was gonna cringe at this episode, and I absolutely did. When Leia lands, we get this scene where she acts like her snarky self. Some of the corniest dialogue I've ever heard. Throughout the episode, it's blatantly obvious that she's in league with the rebels, but the Imperials are too stupid to even notice it. Seriously, the way Leia talks to Imperials, feigning loyalty and whatnot, I have no idea why it took until A New Hope to be caught red-handed assisting the rebels. Anyways, once the three of them are off on an Imperial shuttle, Leia talks about how the plan is to get the rebels to quote-unquote steal the transports, that way Alderaan won't get any blame. This is apparently a better idea than just giving the ships to the rebellion in deep space. Yeah, I disagree with you, Leia. I don't know why Alderaan, as a supplier of rebel equipment, can't just do what I proposed and say the rebels stole it. Wouldn't it be riskier to do it in front of the Imperials, when Leia's obviously a liar? Also, I imagine there has to be a limit on what Alderaan can supply to the rebels before the Empire gets suspicious. I'm pretty sure the Empire knew about Alderaan's treachery, but couldn't do anything about it.
Vader concluded that the stolen plans had been given to Princess Leia Organa of Alderaan. We weren't surprised. For all their talk of being a peaceful planet, Alderaan had been thumbing its nose at the Empire for years.
Yeah, in the expanded universe, Alderaan was pretty much untouchable as a wealthy core world, as a great source of income for the Empire. At least until the Death Star was finished, and Tarkin fired on Alderaan as the first public example of the superweapon. Even then, destroying Alderaan was incredibly risky, since again, it was a great source of income for the Empire. This also explains the question of why, if Palps knew that Bail Organa was a traitor, why he couldn't go after him directly after the events of The Force Unleashed. The answer is simple. Alderaan was incredibly influential, and the Empire faced incredible downsides by deciding to wipe it off the map. It might be an easy explanation, but it works. You see, this is why decanonizing the EU was a bad decision, because coming up with a better expanded universe would be an uphill battle, and doing it without people accusing you of stealing all the good ideas when you repeat even the smallest thing from the EU. You know, speaking of The Force Unleashed, apparently the overrated cowboy wanted to introduce him as an Inquisitor, but the idea was rejected by Disney and it didn't go any further than that. Honestly, Filoni is almost a mascot for Disney itself. He can't come up with his own ideas, so he just takes them from somewhere else. Plagiarism, bitch. Anyhow, the shuttle lands on the area where Ryder is captured by the Empire. And to sum all this up, the princess plays pretend as the rebels fake kidnap her. We also get this pep talk from Leia to Ezra, and to sum up the rest of the episode, the Ghost Crew steal the ships, and Leia keeps pretending that she's loyal to the Empire during all this. Also, something I found arse backwards is that they're giving the Empire a legitimate bombshell story to report on. It was commonly shown in Season 1 that the Empire takes every opportunity to spew constant propaganda and make the rebels out to be bloodthirsty, violent murderers. Well, needless to say, you can kiss that goodbye, because we have none of that anymore. I guess the rebels don't have to deal with negative propaganda about them anymore, if it's gonna drop out of the show. On this occasion, whoever writes the news reports on the holonet has something legitimate here. Ruthless rebels kidnap innocent princess. And as far as the Empire knows, it's the only thing they're being truthful about. Well, unfortunately, we never see the Empire villainize the rebels this way. Also, Ryder, after being taken off planet, decides to go back to Lothal, because he couldn't make up his damn mind on whether or not he wanted to leave. And that's episode 12. This was a plain awful episode when I first watched it. Also, I know you got much needed ships, but where is the crew for those ships? Did you just recruit some rebels off screen? That would have been nice to see, guys. Because come the next episode, the rebels have their ship fully manned. I really wish the story was more cause and effect, you know? So basically, to start this episode, we've got Commander Sato needing a new hyperspace route to travel to. And Sabine suggests the Conquered Dawn system. And the rebels get excited, as they could potentially recruit new allies in the Protectors there. And so they decide to fly into Mandalorian space, with the Ghosts and some rebel ships flying into the system. They are soon after contacted by the Mandos, and told they are trespassing. And as it turns out, the Mando Protectors are aligned with the Empire, and proceed to attack the rebels immediately. They take out 2 of the rebel fighters, but you can forget about them. They never come up again after that action scene. The focus is on Hera, who barely escaped, and was sent to sickbay. Also, I wondered why they fixated on Conquered Dawn instead of finding another hyperspace route, like what the instigator of the episode set up. So Kanan volunteers for an infiltration mission in which he plans to destroy the Mandalorian fighters before they take off. Despite intending to go on the mission alone, Sabine joins him behind his back, and it's too late to go back. So the whole episode has Kanan and Sabine split up. Kanan will offer the Protector leader Fen Rao a chance to join the rebellion, while Sabine will set charges and will detonate them only if Fen refuses. While I suppose you're supposed to find it admirable that Kanan, the one who cares about Hera the most, is trying to negotiate with the Mandos, despite the fact that they put Hera in a critical condition, I have just one question. The pilots who were shot and killed, what about them? Like, I can sort of get it if there was aggression but no lives lost, but Fen Rao and the Protectors took rebel lives, and the fact that they just make everything all about Hera is really questionable. Just like I said, TCW treats death like a passing thought a lot of the time. I guess you can say Rebels does that too. The thing is that the Rebels are supposed to be the good guys, and care about their lowest ranks a hell of a lot more than the Empire does, as Imperial commanders just opt to throw stormtroopers at a problem until it goes away, with little to no regard for their lives. The rebel cause, after all, is supposed to represent freedom and equality from Imperial tyranny. That's how they won people over. It was a war of hearts and minds, and the rebels won people over. Since the random extras who died are never mentioned past their scene of death, and they fixate on Hera, that means that the pilots don't matter. Like, I know in movies like A New Hope, they celebrated the victory and we didn't get a scene of the rebel pilots who lost their lives, but it should be mentioned that A New Hope's goal was to present the heroes of war, rather than the tragedy of war, like many movies at the time, I hear. Fresh off the horrors of Vietnam as mentioned in the Empire of Dreams documentary. And you could at least say that the victory outweighed the lives lost, and the rebels knew what they signed up for, blah blah. But I think a moment of mourning for Biggs by Luke would have been appropriate at least. But maybe it would conflict with the upbeat tone of the film, so you win some, you lose some. But in the context of this episode, the rebels haven't achieved anything. And the fact that they mention Hera's critical condition, but not the pilots who actually lost their lives, it's jarring. Now, most kids would have probably forgotten about the pilots who died because they had zero character and were just cannon fodder. But from an in-universe perspective, the rebels show no care for the pilots that died. But these pilots still existed and did die for the cause. So that's a big problem with the episode. Hell, even I forgot the pilots existed. But thanks to suggestions on Discord, this is an important criticism for the episode. I know we don't care about the pilots, they're cannon fodder for the episode, but you know who would? I think I've made my point. So anyways, Kanan and Sabine do their part during the entire thing. Kanan hops right into Fen Rao's tent and starts chatting away at him. Fen Rao doesn't shoot him, and Kanan talks his ears off while Sabine plants charges across the base. Kanan essentially tries to persuade Fen Rao to join the rebellion, and of course he declines. I found it incredibly weird when Sabine is eventually caught, that Fen Rao, when he's informed of the other intruder, doesn't just execute Kanan and be done with it. Obviously, Sabine was out there sabotaging the ships or supplies, so as far as Fen Rao knows, Kanan was just distracting him and was never sincere about the offer to join the rebellion. Also, I completely scoffed when Fen Rao addresses Sabine, but has his back unprotected against Kanan. Since when does a Mandalorian drop his guard like that? Fen Rao seems to have some lax self-protection skills. And that's on top of the fact that he hasn't even tried to shoot Kanan for the distraction. Anyways, Sabine calls out Fen Rao and challenges him to a match to the death. Fen Rao accepts the duel, and he quickshots Sabine and she dies. Oh wait, that's what would happen if this show had regard for power level consistency, since again, Sabine is like 16 or 17 or something. In actuality, this hardened Mandalorian veteran has the blaster shot off his hand by Sabine. And Sabine instead blows the ships while saying, quote, "There are alternatives to killing." That is a line so ironic because she detonated a bunch of ships that could obviously kill someone close to them. And in an extremely out of character moment, Fen Rao flees to a ship. I don't recall a Mandalorian running away from a problem. Oh wait, he was getting into his fighter to blast away at Kanan and Sabine. Okay, sorry, that's my mistake. Kanan stands on top of Fen Rao's fighter, and Rao tries to shake him off with crazy fast speed. And I must say, Kanan's grip is incredibly strong. Kanan cuts open the cockpit, knocks Fen Rao out, and then brings him to Sabine's getaway transport. And when he wakes up, he gets a comlink transmission which Kanan lets him answer, and he flips like a coin and tells his guy now not to pursue, and that the rebels will be granted safe passage through the system. Although he isn't a full-blown rebel yet. There's a line from the guy on the other end that if the Empire finds out he was captured, and Fen Rao responds to do anything in their power to make sure they don't find out. So both Kanan and Sabine talk to Hera, and that's the episode. Again, no mention of the dead pilots.
Fuck 'em.
Next episode, please. So in the following adventure, if you could call it that, we get another sort of filler episode. I say sort of, because it does come around at the end, but it also feels like the video game trope where you have an asset that you later use for the final battle. We go back to the station from the episode where they introduce Hondo. I find it kinda lazy that they keep repeating locations. This show doesn't have them explore the vast galaxy a lot. It feels a lot like the frontiers of space. It's also a dead giveaway about who will be in this episode, as Ezra mentions a contact who knows about refugees taken prisoner by the Empire. When the Ghost Crew board the station, Zeb in particular soon sees that the two refugees are Lasats, his species. If you remember my Season 1 review, I mentioned how his species were wiped out in a genocide by the Empire for an unspecified reason. When it was mentioned, it was essentially just the Empire is bad moment, and nothing else. Zeb was never shaken by losing his homeworld or anything unless it was brought up. Anyways, the two Lasats revere Zeb as a captain of the Honor Guard. When the Ghost Crew flees, we see Hondo and Naka kind of stall the Imperial backup that shows up. I guess they did a good job of showing Hondo's unpredictable nature, as he plays both sides. Immediately after pointing the Imperials to the Ghost Crew, he immediately contacts Ezra to warn them of the attack. Something I don't understand though, is how Hondo is a double agent informant for the Empire. Did the Imperials do no background checks? I remember there was this double agent in Crimson Empire who ratted out both sides for his self-gain. So I guess I can't criticize this show without being a hypocrite. Although the difference is that I'd imagine that Hondo and Naka would be a notable wanted fugitive from the Empire, being a pirate and all. And the fact that Hondo mentioned losing his crew to the Imperials, while the old hag in Crimson Empire was essentially a nobody feeding info to both sides. Anyways, upon the Empire showing up, the two Lasats refuse to fight the Empire when Sabine throws some weapons, and the lack of backup results in the Ghost Crew being cornered. Good going, guys. I really hate characters who don't realize the kill or be killed mentality in a moment like this. So to make a long story short, Hondo, after playing both sides, lets the rebels escape, and they get away on the Ghost, which was not impounded at this point, because the Imperials are stupid, and just as Agent Callus and the boys show up, the Ghost is already in hyperspace. Hooray for the unintimidating Empire! So the goal of the two Lasats is to get to Lyra-San, aka a new homeworld for the Lasats. It's safe to say that this is a Zeb-focused episode, although it doesn't really start that way. The two Lasats in question have this really weird way of talking. I'm not criticizing anything there, but basically, Hondo is captured by the Empire and starts to fuck around with them, and the Ghost Crew fuck around with the Lasats in a ritual or something. They figure stuff out when Zeb uses his usual weapon to locate a spot in unknown space where the Lasats can rebuild, with Agent Callus and the boys in pursuit. Although Zeb uses his weapon to create a protective shield around the Ghost, and damn, they're at the planet. Man, why would this make an excellent base for the rebellion? But unfortunately, that possibility is never discussed ever. And that, my friends, is episode 14. I didn't really have much to say about it. and that's mostly because it's a waste of time, which is only set up for the finale. So let's get on with the next episode now. In episode 15, the Ghost powers down internal heating because apparently they're here to steal a shipment belonging to the mining guild for the rebellion. This episode sets up intergalactic space worms, and oh boy, when I saw them, I knew they would be a poorly implemented Chekhov's gun for the finale of this show. Hera calls them Purgils, and after dealing with them when they bump into the Ghost, we get these black and yellow TIE fighters, almost like Barry B. Benson colored them. Since this episode doesn't matter beyond the space worms, I'm just gonna summarize this episode. As the Ghost crew cause problems for the mining guild, and eventually Ezra forms a bond with the space worms, which will be essential for Star Wars Rebels endgame. Yeah, that's right. This show has its own endgame, which I suppose had more build-up than the Rise of Skywalker will ever have. But with that being said, let's dunk on the next episode. In episode 16, the Rebel fleet gets attacked by the Empire, with some more fighters being destroyed. But let's be real, any unnamed extras don't fucking matter in this show. I also really hate that an episode starts like this often. Me wishing the story was more reactive would be the main takeaway here. Anyways, and predictably, they get away. And to refresh themselves or whatever, they gotta make contact to the rebel cell on Ryloth. And given Hera is a Twi'lek, you know what that means. This is gonna introduce some characters from Hera's life. Specifically, her dad Cham Syndulla. As one can infer, Hera hasn't spoken to her dad for some time. I hope we all remember Cham from the Clone Wars. I guess the Filoni groupies completely remember, but as for the rest of us, this was the moment I was like, oh yeah, I kinda remember that guy. He was the Twi'lek who helped Mace Windu, right? And I'd like to point out that the subtlety of Kanan and Hera's relationship is completely negated. I said one of the few saving graces is how their romantic relationship is not spelt out for you. And it's more like a partnership than anything most of the time. And they have to deal with other Ghost crew members, but here, they break that. And it's really annoying. To summarize the problem, Kanan indulges that trope where he's meeting his bitch's father, and he's super nervous, because he needs the approval of her father. Otherwise, Hera will totally dump him. The subtlety is missing, because obviously Kanan is kissing his bitch's dad's ass to get his approval. Kanan starts fanboying the shit out of Cham, being like, wow, you're the war hero who took on the Separatists with Mace Windu and Ryloth during the Clone Wars? Oh my god, I never thought I'd meet such an influence such as yourself, blah 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 blah. It reminds me of that moment in Season 1 where Kanan pretended to be a proud Empire supporter while Ezra was trying to bail him out. Now that I think about it, I don't even know if Freddie Prinze Jr. is even a good fit for Kanan. He's certainly a bad influence, given he's the dickhead who spread that rumor about Dave Filoni directing the Vader hallway scene, and his groupies parroted all that without the slightest effort to fact check it. Ugh. Yeah, so I'm not a fan of Fred here, especially when it comes to live-action Scooby-Doo.
Oh, yo, the biatch was like, what? And I was like, later on.
Anyways, Cham also brought two of his sidekicks, and the two groups go on a joint mission. The Rebel fleet need to capture an Imperial carrier, but Cham Syndulla wants to commit Michael Bay on it, because they want to send a message to the Empire. I have to ask though, is why do they have to blow it up? Instead of using it for the Ryloth Rebellion, using an enemy's asset is a far better strategy, obviously. They don't really tell us why Cham thinks blowing it up is a better idea, where having an asset taken from the enemy obviously would make things easier in the long term. So they fake an attack to get clearance to land on the ship carrier, and then Cham and friends use stun shots on the Ghost crew, and reveals to Hera that they were just using her to destroy the ship. Something that made the writing incredibly awkward is where they used the stun shots on everyone else except Hera. Instead, Cham and friends just cuff Hera to the TIE bomber seat or whatever. It's not even like you can tell me Cham didn't want to harm his daughter. here because stun shots knock you out on a whim, correct? This is literally only done so the still conscious Hera is able to kick Chopper to get up and uncuff her, and so on and so forth with waking everyone up. The writers didn't challenge themselves, and it shows. I also hate how Cham and friends take out the Imperials, with one of them having a clear shot at Cham, but waste the opportunity. Whoever does the storyboarding for fight scenes really needs to step up their game or be fired. Anyways, the Ghost Crew get up shortly after, and they go after Cham and friends. Sabine and Zeb split up with everyone else, and it's a triple threat essentially with 3 factions fighting for control. But it's not as interesting as it sounds. It's just the usual of useless stormtroopers, missing shots, and wasting opportunities to kill the rebels. Honestly, you'd think there being 2 opposing rebel groups would make for good drama, since not only are they fighting the Empire, they're fighting each other. But that's not the case, since the Empire are a non-issue as usual. When Hera's group board the bridge, Kanan decides to let Ezra attempt to pull a Jedi mind trick. And here, I don't really think this is really the time. They present it in the dumbest way too, with Ezra just coming up with orders for the officer on the spot. Anyways, Sabine and Zeb take out Cham's 2 friends, but Cham already disabled the engines to the ship, so it's a dilemma of how they're gonna get out of this one. It's really annoying to see how short-sighted Cham is. Hera basically speaks to her pa about the bigger picture, something you'd think he'd realize by now, and he gives Hera a chance, especially when Cham's 2 friends start agreeing with her. So the rest of the episode has them repel Imperial forces that arrive, and Cham actually gets to blow up another ship with a rigged TIE bomber. So yeah, as always, we've got that happy ending with Hera and her dad on good terms, blah blah blah, and that's the episode. Now comes an episode I really hate, even on the first watch alone. It's called The Honorable Ones, and it starts with something that feels out of place when it comes to the rest of the episode. They arrive at Geonosis from Attack of the Clones, in which Captain Rex accompanies the Ghost Crew, and when Chopper scans the planet, there's no life. Now this start isn't that bad actually, showing us one of the places that the Empire genocided the shit out of, and Rex expecting to meet a lot of bugs when they arrived. If I were to be constructive, I would have liked some more ominous music and better atmosphere. Like maybe the planet doesn't look quite the same to sell the point that the planet has been wiped clean of all life, but they completely ruin it when they dock onto a nearby space station, which is completely quiet. And right when Zeb feels like they've walked into a trap, it is indeed revealed to be a trap, with Kallus and the boys there to catch them. Quick question. Where are the Inquisitors? I kind of forgot they existed for the longest time, but it is a good question. Why aren't they all working together to catch the rebels? Like stated in an earlier episode, did they just part ways or something? Anyways, unsurprisingly, despite Kallus's best efforts, all the rebels except Zeb get away. Apparently this space station has escape pods, which seems like a major oversight since they were trying to trap the rebels. So giving the space station an escape pod is kind of lazy writing. This story basically has Kallus join Zeb in the escape pod, and their bitch slapping results in the pod crash landing on a moon of Geonosis. And then I realized that we were on this episode. Yeah, that's right. I had some idea about this episode prior to watching it for the first time, and I was kind of unimpressed. Why? Well, that's because this is one of those forced episodes where 2 enemies are forced to bond for the sake of survival. This trope is in a lot of kids' shows for some reason, and it's not done well here. They don't even land on Geonosis. Instead, they land on one of its moons for some reason. I guess the main planet's gravity just couldn't be fucked being as strong that day. Point is, they land on a barren ice planet instead. Specifically, in a darn ice cave. Kallus, when they finally crash, has an injured leg. And finally, Zeb has an ample opportunity to finish him. But instead of just executing him on the spot, he doesn't shoot him and be done with it. His given reason? He wanted his leg to heal up so they could finish their fight fair and square. Wow. How lazy could these writers be? Yeah. So this is the Kallus and Zeb bonding episode, and it's as forced as it comes. Zeb squanders his chance to be rid of Agent Kallus, and it feels incredibly out of character. He was ready to rip Kallus's head off his torso in Season 1 when he learned that Kallus took a bow rifle off of one of the Lasat honor guard, something which Kallus himself proudly and sadistically remarked. Also, since Zeb is not a Jedi with values of mercy, this is just a contrived reason to keep Kallus alive. And it's not even like Zeb is extremely hard on Kallus, telling him to shut up or viciously snapping at him. He almost talks to Kallus like he's nothing more than an annoying, intrusive neighbor. This out-of-place banter between the two basically leads to the two talking about personal shit about themselves. Nothing like who they have a crush on, but it's here where we learn that the bow rifle that Kallus took from one of the honor guards was not a trophy. Rather, in Lasat culture, he actually earned the gun after defeating the honor guard head on, and the Lasat in question willingly gave him the rifle after being defeated. Aside from that one scene of Kallus showing an admiration for the Ghost Crew, Kallus as a villain showed next to no morals. I mean, at the start of the show, he kicked a stormtrooper off to his death over a joke. Throughout the course of the show, Kallus showed little redeemability after that. Like I said before, he gloated about taking a bow rifle off a Lasat warrior, and the things he did for the Empire were, in context, terrible. Like, he clearly knew that the Empire were enslaving Wookiees, but Kallus didn't care at all. So this line in the episode where Kallus says that he doesn't ask questions seems like he knows the Empire is bad, but is happy to look the other way. A lot of villains will know the difference between right and wrong, but will do whatever they want just because they want it. So by the standards set up by the show itself, Kallus was pretty terrible. Kallus shows next to no redeemable traits before this episode, and now it turns out that he wasn't such a bad guy all this time? Bullshit! Kallus shares a story about a violent encounter with Saw Gerrera and a Lasat mercenary, and how his first unit was wiped out one by one. I find it hilarious that he talks about his unit like he'd care, because he showed no such thing for stormtroopers under his command in the show. He usually just barked out orders and whatnot. To make a long story short, I was completely taken out of the episode. As a redemption story they're trying to tell, this is kinda weak. Kallus is presented to us as a ruthless ISB agent who follows Imperial orders and doesn't care for morals, and now they're trying to paint him in a sympathetic light. I didn't find it believable at all. Kallus, from what I remember, was never shown signs of a hidden conscience. I also have to note how he didn't care how Minister Tua was going to be executed. Not exactly someone who cares for others. So anyways, Zeb and Kallus help each other escape, with Kallus getting a piggyback ride on Zeb's back. Kallus essentially becomes a climbing instructor, and by the time they get up, Kallus has a choice whether or not to turn on Zeb, despite all their progress, and he chooses to help Zeb survive. Not earned in the slightest. Kallus goes to hide somewhere, while the ghost shows up to pick up Zeb, and basically the two return to their usual routine, with Kallus thinking about his allegiance, blah blah. I don't know how well I did at conveying why I hate this episode, but it mostly had to do with Zeb's wasted opportunity to execute Kallus, because he never seemed like the type who would show mercy or someone who would think he would need help in getting out of the cave. They just wanted to give Kallus of all characters a redemption arc, and there were no hints at his hidden conscience beforehand. This is probably as unbelievable as Pixar's Cars. Lightning McQueen was the biggest dick in the world, with nothing redeemable when we meet him, but the movie has him become a better person just because the writers wanted him to, as if we're supposed to believe that he was a good car all along. The movie even has him do something that might be perceived as racist to some.
Uno lapo. I work solo mio. No pit stopo. Comprendo? Okay.
Gee, imagine walking up to an Italian person and speaking to them like that. It would get you cancelled immediately. Agent Kallus is obviously worse though. He's participated in crimes against the galaxy, such as the genocide of the Lasats, and has shown no care to those around him, like Minister Tua and that random stormtrooper from the pilot. Yet we're supposed to believe that he has a morality. Yeah, I don't think so. You know, when that fake out happened when it looked like he would shoot Zeb, I was snickering. But then I was caught off guard when he instead helped Zeb. Fucking awful. Alright, let's get on with the next episode since this video is going to probably be 2 hours, if not longer. So in the next episode, we are dropped into a fight scene with Kanan and Ezra against the Inquisitors with no context. Kanan does mention that they won't be able to mark a base here for the rebellion, so I presume they were scouting out. Still though, it feels like there's 10 to 20 minutes of an episode missing. And I guess that's how all the episodes, minus the pilot, start. Ezra in particular should be no match for the Inquisitors, but his tag teaming with Kanan results in both of their survival. You just love how the bad guys can hardly touch the good guys ever. At least we've got Buffy flirting with Kanan instead of Ezra. There's a part where Ezra's knocked over the edge, and Kanan is holding onto him while the Inquisitors are approaching. And it's here where they have a perfect opportunity to kill both of them. But just like all the other times, they squander it. Ezra manages to use the Force to summon a flying animal as an escape route. I love how convenient it is that there's always an animal around when he needs it. Upon escaping via a winged animal, the Phantom shows up not far behind, and they get inside it. Ezra talks like they just went for a little jog around the street, and starts moving into a relaxed posture. Fighting Inquisitors is piss easy by now. Kanan responds that they seem to be everywhere they go, something I find utterly laughable, because I sure as hell don't remember the Inquisitors in the last episode, or the one before that, or the one before that. And geez, I half forgot they existed since episode 10 or something. This is episode 18. If you don't know, since every episode is roughly 21 or 22 minutes, we haven't seen Buffy or Penis Head, yes, that's my nickname for him, shut up, for nearly 3 goddamn hours. I did the math. So apparently any potential base keeps getting intercepted by the Inquisitors. So Kanan decides to have a little meeting with Ahsoka. There's this brief scene where Hera and Zeb seem minorly annoyed that they can't find a base for the rebellion. To be honest, they don't really sell the urgency in finding a darn base. Like, I understand that they need to dock somewhere eventually, but they never tried to emphasize the importance of it. It feels like another quota to be fulfilled almost. Anyways, Ezra walks into Ahsoka meditating in front of a holocron of...
What is that?
Yeah, since the Rebels' art style doesn't line up perfectly with the Clone Wars, they absolutely butchered the model for Anakin Skywalker. He looks like he belongs in an animated doll movie for girls under the age of 10. With that being said, Ahsoka talks about Anakin, about how he was a compassionate Jedi general, rarely losing a battle and blah blah blah. Ahsoka references the last time she saw him was when he was rushing off to save the Chancellor and whatnot. I mentioned this in my Tales of the Jedi Chinese knockoff edition video, and that's why Bail Organa never told Ahsoka that Darth Vader was Anakin Skywalker. Surely it would have come up in conversation between the two, right? It seems like a very convenient secret to hold from Ahsoka so we can have that moment. Luke was obviously not told because it was meant to keep him safe. Well, anyways, Kanan walks in, and the trio talk about how the Inquisitors keep pursuing them. And they try to pass off the 2 useless Inquisitors of this season as worse than the first one, that being the Grand Inquisitor. But you're not fooling me, show. The 2 Inquisitors have been just as useless as the Grand Inquisitor in this series. They could never get a stretch on the good guys. Ahsoka remarks how she wishes that she could just talk to someone like Obi-Wan or Yoda for answers. And Kanan recalls the time he and Ezra spoke to Yoda in Season 1 through the Force, so it's back to Lothal. They take the Phantom and head for the system. For some reason, the Imperial fleet hasn't returned to blockade it, so the good guys don't have to worry about getting past the damn blockade because there is none. This just seems like lazy writing. Ignoring that, they land on the planet, which at this point seems to have no Imperial presence at all. I guess the Rebel presence on Lothal is something the Empire's just overlooking. Of course they would be this lazy. Moving on, they land near the temple, and apparently, Ahsoka mentions that she cannot use the Force to enter the temple, because she's not a Jedi, having left the Order long ago. Alright, that doesn't really make much sense to me. The Force isn't something you need a key card for. Plus, if you think about it, how would Ezra be recognized as a Jedi if he was never inducted into the official order? Rather, he was picked up by another Jedi who didn't even reach the rank of Jedi Knight. Logistically, Ahsoka might as well said she couldn't be fucked helping in opening up the temple. So she just watches Ezra and Kanan do it, and Chopper is ordered to stay behind and guard the ship as the trio walk into the temple. There, they immediately use their problem-solving skills to try and contact Master Yoda, figuring that Kanan contacted him through meditation. Okay, that's probably one of the few times I can say the characters were using critical thinking to solve their problem. Kanan proceeds to see a path that only he can see, and so it's his path to go alone. Upon walking through the bright light, he's taken to an illusion of some Jedi training ground, and Kanan sees a temple guard, who despite the masked, muffled voice, seems like he's voiced by either James Arnold Taylor in a Plo Koon sort of voice, or Jason Isaacs. Gee, I wonder who this mysterious temple guard is. The guard tells Kanan that Ezra will become a servant of evil and he must be eliminated before that happens. And so Kanan duels him to prevent the guard from harming Ezra. Meanwhile, Chopper scans that the Inquisitors are coming, and so he bails and proceeds to a new location, just before Buffy and Penis Head show up. The two argue as usual, and they figure out that Chopper having fled, the Jedi are still at the temple. Something that doesn't make much sense is how Buffy and Penis Head found the trio, as it's shown through Buffy's probe droid that she didn't know there was a Jedi temple here until it was scanned. Anyways, we cut to Ezra and Ahsoka having a conversation about Yoda. Ahsoka says that he was wise and kind and yada yada, but throughout the Clone Wars, he became more and more sad and distraught. And Ahsoka remarks that it's almost as if he knew something was coming before the Jedi Order was actually destroyed. Yeah, thanks for reminding me that he was warned of Order 66 ahead of time and did nothing. Although I have to point out that Ahsoka had already left the Order and had little contact with Yoda or any other Jedi by the time Yoda was bonged on the head with that warning about the Great Jedi Purge. So how she knew this, beyond Yoda's deepening sadness, is not explained. Also, since Yoda decided to tell no one of his warning, that just makes things more dumb, because only Yoda should be thinking all this, as the sole person with the direct warning of Order 66. Just as Ahsoka's done explaining, Ezra disappears like he had 3 wishes from the genie from Aladdin, and it's here where Ezra gets an interview with,
"What is that?"
Oh, come on. Did they seriously have to butcher the model for Master Yoda too? We see Kanan continuing to duel with the temple guard, and then we cut to Ahsoka, in which she talks to an illusion of Anakin Skywalker, and basically gets indirect confirmation that he's Darth Vader. I am so close to talking about what I want to talk about, but the season finale will be soon upon us. Ezra gets a history lesson with Yoda, in which they oddly show us live-action footage from Attack of the Clones, which is minorly immersion-breaking. This whole time, I'm distracted by Yoda's fugly design. And I get it, Yoda isn't supposed to be nice to look at, but you can tell they butchered his design even by that standard. His design in the Clone Wars was infinitely better, and accurate to what you'd expect him to look like in that art style. Anyways, Kanan suddenly, after he's dueling with the guards for a bit, decides to disarm himself and bow down, admitting that he can't protect Ezra from himself and he's done what he can, blah blah. I found it stupid that he would drop his guard. Yeah, it's a vision or illusion, whatever. But how the hell did he figure out this is what he was supposed to do? I remember when I played Mysteries of the Sith that I had no fucking clue how to get past the final boss, and that I was ironically supposed to deactivate my lightsaber to make it past. And keep in mind, I had figured out the rest of the game all on my own, but when it comes to that last part, I was stuck for over an hour. Thankfully, this isn't a video game, but rather a medium with a linear path, but still, I'd imagine how confused I'd be if this was translated to a video game medium. Can't exactly say this was earned. It's just Kanan realizing something, bowing down, and then he's knighted. The temple guard also takes off his goddamn helmet, and yep, I called it. It's the Grand Damn Inquisitor. I guess you're supposed to go, whoa, but I'm completely deadpan during all this. So anyways, the three protagonists wrap everything up with their personal struggles and then exit the temple. As Buffy and Penis Head are confronted by illusions of the temple guard, and don't even bump into the trio as they escape on the Phantom. And they wrap up the episode with Ezra saying that Yoda told him to find Malachor. When I heard that for the first time, the sweating intensified. Oh no, they're dragging Knights of the Old Republic 2 into this? Based on the episode, and the ones actually concerning Malachor, you can tell that this was nothing more than shitty KOTOR bait to get people speculating. I really hated the what are they going to make canon this time mentality in hindsight, because we all know that Filoni relishes in all that. Drip feeding stuff from the expanded universe and baiting people with it. He's publicly said that he sees EU fans as little more than fussy children, so that's not surprising. And just like Boba Fett in The Mandalorian, you gotta wait some episodes until you can get into the important shit. So let's just huff and puff and get it over with. So following the stolen transport carrier, they still need a new base. It's proposed that they should have a base on the moon of Burzite, or Bazidi. Yeah, that's right. They finally located a potential base that the Empire won't find. At least not for a while. Gee, I guess all that talk in the last episode about how the Inquisitors keep finding the rebels or whatever doesn't matter. Because now they've got a definitive base. And yeah, I know it won't last. But still. So the conflict ends up being that the carrier doesn't have enough fuel. So the Ghost Crew's gonna steal a fuel shipment. Guess who the protagonist of this episode is? It's Chopper. And that's where you know that there's gonna be some serious antics for this episode. Chopper disobeys the other crew members while he's ordered to check on Imperial comm chatter and protect the ghost or whatever. And he disobeys immediately at that, because he really wants a new leg. So he opts to steal one from a merchant. Okay, I know it's totally in character for Chopper to do this, but I thought a key point of the story is making people's lives less hard. When the rebels do something unnecessarily bad like this, I just hate it. Like with Cassian Andor killing his informant in Rogue One, one could argue that he did lower the risk of getting caught. But Chopper is stealing a leg from the merchant because he's a fussy droid. Seriously, Chopper never gets severely punished for his misdeeds ever, such as stealing from a legitimate merchant trying to make a living. I don't think something the show realizes is that the Empire is making everyone's lives hard, correct? But Chopper isn't doing the people of the galaxy any favors by stealing from someone who probably needs to pay his taxes and put food on the plate. Chopper has the traits of a hateable villain at this point, and by God, do I hate him so much. So anyways, Chopper boards an Imperial cargo transport, and it's here where we're introduced to AP-5, who is an Imperial inventory droid. He's presented as a droid no one in the Empire respects, and I pieced together from a mile away that he would become Chopper's sidekick, or vice versa, whatever. I can read this show like a fucking book. This is what they delayed the trip to Malachor for? AP-5 encounters Chopper hiding, and at first, as an Imperial droid, the two fight and scuffle, but almost immediately after, Chopper unwisely gives away information about himself. He convinces AP-5 to betray the Empire and removes his restraining bolt so the two can be friends and whatnot. They both proceed to hijack the ship, detaching the stormtroopers out into space after luring them to the cargo area, and they basically contact the Ghost, with AP-5 warning them that the Empire is waiting for the rebels at their intended destination, and Atolon is a better place to establish a base. So with the warning ahead of time, the rebel fleet narrowly avoids the trap, although AP-5 is busted up by the Imperial officers still on board. They try to have this emotional moment at the end, where Chopper gives up his stolen leg to save AP-5. Yeah, the prospect of Chopper having a friend seems incredibly out of place. I guess they just wanted a buddy for Chopper. This episode in general was a waste of time, and achieves very little, even if AP-5 pops up later. Alright. One last episode before we can get into the two-part finale. Episode 20 is called The Mystery of Chopper Base. It starts with Ezra and Kanan doing their usual lightsaber training, and let me tell you, it doesn't tie into the rest of the episode. Something I have to ask though, is are these episodes out of chronological order? I ask this because Ahsoka, Kanan and Ezra haven't even thought about going to Malachor yet. This would also be a super awkward time to place the episodes out of order. Anyways, this episode just pads out the larger plot by having some dangerous predators around the established base. Basically, it's a bunch of giant spiders. They swoop in and take out one of the rebel pilots, and when Rex and Sabine go to investigate, Rex is caught by the spiders, and basically the rest of the episode is a rescue mission and then escaping. It's mindless filler. I imagine setting up a base in a random system would hurdle challenges, but did we really need to see some struggles against giant spiders? The notable thing in this episode is Hera being concerned for Kanan before he heads to Malachor with Ezra and Ahsoka, and they hug, and yada yada, that's the rest of the episode. Underwhelming as shit, and a key representation of an episode with zero substance. It's just a side quest designed to waste your goddamn time. Alright. With those crappy episodes out of the way, let's get into Twilight of the Apprentice, the 2-part finale to Star Wars Rebels Season 2. If you couldn't tell, it's been a drag writing my thoughts on these episodes. Not to mention I gotta narrate and edit together the video, and then export it, and then upload it, and you get the point. Anyways, the episode starts with Ahsoka talking to Rex through the comms, and I'd like to mention that there were a bunch of Rex and Ahsoka shippers too, because of course there are. So before they get to Malachor, Kanan and Ahsoka tell Ezra that Malachor has always been off limits to Jedi, due to old legends and scary stories told to them during their early years of training. And then comes perhaps Ahsoka's most infamous line.
There's always a bit of truth in legends.
Yeah, that's right. That's the line that filthy casuals read too deeply into, and kept parodying as meaning, make legend shit canon again, and that Filoni was the savior of the expanded universe. This sort of shit is why people hate Dave Filoni. As an example, I'll focus on a character I've talked about during my Rebels review, Zeb. In the lead-up promotion for Rebels, Filoni claims that Zeb is an all-new alien species.
Zeb, he's his own new alien species, and...
This is a bullshit lie. Checking the Wikipedia page shows that the Lasats go back to the RPG source books from 1988. The use of the Lasats is too specific to claim that Filoni didn't know what he was talking about. He knew, and he lied. I guess this crap started because the context of the line was in relation to a place called Malachor, and anyone who's played Knights of the Old Republic 2 knows about Malachor 5, being the final battle of the Mandalorian Wars and the planet of the game's climax. It's questionable to say if Dave Filoni has even played KOTOR. I guess the misconception from Filoni groupies kinda stuck. People keep trying to present Dave Filoni as some sort of outlier, and that he's against Kathleen Kennedy as much as most people are. What they fail to realize is that Dave Filoni is one of the Disney shills. I mean, after all, he's been given an unnatural amount of freedom to fuck around in the Star Wars universe. As stated before, Filoni took an EU species and blatantly acted as if he invented it, when he did not. That is exactly what Disney did when promoting The Force Awakens, acting like Phasma was the first female villain in Star Wars ever, when if you look to the films alone, we in fact had Zam Wessel. Dave Filoni has played everyone in fact, and that's why people are beginning to despise him. It may have taken years for Dave Filoni to get the full amount of ridicule he deserved from the start, but that's hindsight for you. With that mini rant out of the way, Kanan places his trust in Master Yoda telling the three of them to go to Malachor, and that they'll find something here to stop the Inquisitors. When he said that, I scoffed, because it's not like you've had such a hard time with Buffy and Penis Head in particular, or the Grand Inquisitor before them. Again, they haven't laid a scratch on the good guys. So upon landing on Malachor, they have a look around. There's a passing line of dialogue that there's another ship that's landed here, so they're not the only ones who are looking for the secrets of Malachor. Oh my, I wonder who it could be. Chopper stays behind as usual, as Ahsoka reads an ancient inscription, but Ezra feels compelled to touch something, and well, it leads to the ground collapsing, and the three of them fall down on their asses. Good going, Ezra. This almost feels like they just wanted the episode to progress quicker, because upon getting up, they see the Sith temple across from them. a bit of a walking distance away. A little while later, Ezra comes across an old crossguard lightsaber, and we get this pointless history lesson about how an army of Jedi Knights attacked Malachor thousands of years ago, but it has little to do with the episode. That's why they're ambushed by an Inquisitor. Yeah, that's right, there's an Inquisitor here. It isn't Buffy nor Penis Head. It's an Inquisitor exclusive to this two-parter. Yeah, what a shoehorned villain that you're gonna throw in just as the season is about to end. Aside from being an extra boss battle, the only purpose this Inquisitor seems to serve is getting Ezra to fall through the ground again, so he can be separated from Ahsoka and Kanan, and he directly comes face to face with Darth Maul. Despite Sam Witwer's best efforts to disguise it, you can tell it's him, even if they do a good job darkening his face. Maul introduces himself as an old man who crash-landed, and offers Ezra help with getting inside the Sith temple. To be fair, Ezra doesn't trust Maul right away, and doesn't give him his real name, instead going by that fake alias of Jabba, as he has several times before, although this guy is way too suspicious to trust. Ezra doesn't seem to ask a lot of questions about who he is, and Maul responds with vague answers, such as denying that he's a Jedi, and when Ezra asks him if he's a Sith, he doesn't say yes or no. Instead, he goes on about how the Sith took everything from him, ripping him away from his mother, as well as murdering his brother. Ezra relates to that, in terms of the Empire taking everything away from him. So anyways, we cut to Chopper being ordered to intercept the Inquisitor's ship before he escapes in it, and well, he hijacks it, using it to help Ahsoka and Kanan subdue the Inquisitor. So yep, he's defeated. Damn, that was way too easy. We were just introduced to this villain, and now he's already defeated?
Lame!
Anyways, we cut back to Ezra and Maul going into the temple, in which Maul tells Ezra that two need to lift the stones to enter the temple. No more, no less. I really hate how easily swayed Ezra is by this mysterious stranger, helping him with whatever he tells him to do. He also encourages Ezra to use his anger and passion to open the door, and after a bit of hesitation, Ezra uses his emotions to open the damn entrance. Okay, am I missing something here? Because I'm calling bullshit. The fact that Ezra is easily swayed by this suspicious old guy after just meeting him? Come to think of it, Ezra seemed to never actively struggle with the dark side. His emotional outbursts always seemed to calm down after a while, and never drawed him towards more power. In fact, there seems to be no struggle with the dark side at all. Same goes with Kanan. This show seems to just dumb down the Force a lot, because the wills would be too complicated for the children. You know, with a certain character that will be introduced later, they also spread that equal light and equal dark misconception that is the bane of anyone who properly understands the Force. Anyways, we cut to Ahsoka and Kanan questioning this random Inquisitor on what he was doing on Malachor, and he alludes to hunting down Maul, referring to him as a shadow. So Ezra and Maul encounter a Sith holocron across a chasm, so they work together to propel Ezra across, and the plan works, as Ezra grabs the holocron, which activates the temple or something, and it catches the eye of Kanan and Ahsoka, and the Inquisitor uses the opportunity to contact backup. Yeah, they didn't take his equipment when they captured him. Why the hell does stuff like this always happen in this show? That's just lazy writing. Anyways, Kanan and Ahsoka decide not to execute the Inquisitor for some reason, and just decide to take him with them. Ezra, meanwhile, has to do a trust jump with Maul, and well, that's where Buffy and Penis Head show up to the area, where the three of them take Kanan and Ahsoka head on, with Ezra and Maul showing up after opening one of the doors with the holocron, and Ezra jumps in to help Kanan and Ahsoka, and we've got this whole standoff, where Maul laughs in a sinister tone, and that's the cliffhanger. Let me just say firsthand that it isn't as dramatic as a cliffhanger as it could have been. Something about the presentation is just off. Maybe it's the music that isn't pumping the fuck on or something, but that's the cliffhanger. But you know that the season's not over until I cover everything. So let's just get straight into it. So in part 2, they have a brief scuffle, with Maul joining in on the side of the Jedi, although I presume it won't last long, and the Inquisitors decide to bail. And I know I forgot to talk about this in the last episode, but they literally use their spinning lightsabers to hover away. like a helicopter. That is perhaps one of the stupidest gimmicks I've seen in the show. I thought Ezra's blaster saber was gimmicky enough, but this is even worse. I think someone should have told Filoni a long time ago that lightsabers are weightless. And yes, I know they don't seem weightless, but in the universe they are. Deal with it. So this doesn't make any sense. It also confuses me and makes me ask why Darth Vader doesn't have a lightsaber like that. Why the Inquisitors get grade A Jedi hunting sabers and Vader gets his shitty single hilt? Well, whatever. Once they flee, it's not gonna be long until a certain someone shows up. And since none of them are a match for him, they gotta act fast. Maul suggests using the holocron to get on top of the Sith temple to unlock the knowledge or whatever. I love how this episode doesn't even tell us what the ultimate weapon is supposed to be. Like, I can buy that Maul would be highly secretive or whatever, but then Ahsoka and Kanan put their reluctant trust in him, and they're all circumstantial allies now. So they get their lift up. I'm just remembering how Ahsoka let Maul go to cause a distraction to save her own skin. And here, I'm wondering why she's even putting reluctant trust in Maul. Think of all the damage she could cause, and has caused since the siege of Mandalore. Remember that in Disney canon, Maul's entire presence here is all Ahsoka's fault. Never forget that. Kanan and Ezra split up with Maul and Ahsoka to get up, in which they're briefly attacked by the unnamed Inquisitor, but he's repelled easily and he just gives up and flies away. What a way to further emphasize the uselessness of the Inquisitors. Anyways, despite Kanan putting no trust in Maul, he lets him take the next ride with Ezra. Yeah, I really hate how these characters aren't as cautious as they should be. Since when has Maul ever genuinely been a nice guy? He also demonstrates his manipulative nature in the next sequence as Buffy opts to ambush them, while Penis Head and the unnamed Inquisitor attack Kanan and Ahsoka. Wouldn't the better strategy be for all three Inquisitors to pick off one of the two groups and then deal with the others later? Ezra and Maul don't struggle much with Buffy, as Maul literally has her at a force grip, telling Ezra to finish her, and Ezra hesitates with that whole "I can't give into my emotions" thing, and at this point, I really don't understand why he doesn't just kill her and be done with it. This sort of stuff makes sense because Count Dooku was disarmed and defenseless, for example. Hell, in The Force Unleashed, Ram Koda encouraging Starkiller not to lose his way at Palpatine made sense too. And it's not like Starkiller had the time to let go of his anger and then kill him while keeping his cool. Plus, as I hear, in the novelization, Palps was just feigning defeat and was tricking Starkiller before the big ambush that finally killed him. Here, I'm thinking about how they should have given Ezra a clearer path to the dark side. Start with him being extremely pissed about losing his parents to the Empire or something, because it feels like that so far that Ezra's only being tempted by the dark side, starting with this episode. We're nearly at the halfway point of this entire show, for Christ's sake. Well, anyways, when Ezra hesitates, Maul throws his lightsaber at Buffy, and it's gone. What a pitiful end to a useless villain. Soon afterwards, Ezra and Maul see Kanan and Ahsoka fighting Penis Head and no-name Inquisitor, and Maul steps in to help, telling Ezra to place the holocron on top of the temple's obelisk or whatever, and Maul proceeds to then straight up execute Penis Head in less than 10 seconds after engagement. And it's gone. Then no-name, with both of his allies dead, tries to use his portable helicopter to escape, but since the hilt's fucked by battle, it breaks apart mid-flight and he falls to his death. And it's gone. Damn, does that feel like a quota to fulfill or not? 3 useless villains die in the same bloody episode? Immediately after winning their battle, Maul immediately proclaims his plan to claim what's in the temple with Ezra as his apprentice, proceeding to strike at Kanan and fucking blinding him. And it's gone. Gee, I wonder where they took that from. Yeah, they totally ripped off The Force Unleashed, didn't they? It's safe to say that I liked Ram Koda more than anyone in Rebels. Such an underused character. So yeah, Kanan and Ahsoka drop their guard, and now Kanan's got a disability, that being blindness. Ahsoka runs up to find Ezra, while Kanan stays behind to confront Maul. Despite not being able to see, he's able to literally hold off Maul and throw him off the temple. Okay? I wouldn't expect someone with the power level of Kanan to readjust to having no physical sight so quickly. Recalling Ram Koda, who was blinded, it's shown that once he survived the fall, he laxed his force use and became a blind drunk. and it took him a while to recover. And for context, Coda would have been in his 60s at youngest, I presume. He, as the mentor character, had a whole arc in of itself within the story of The Force Unleashed. From what I remember, once Kanan is blinded, he stumbles a bit, but quickly adapts to his new lifestyle immediately. Making him blind seems to have next to no point, is what I'm saying. So yeah. Meanwhile, Ezra realizes he's been tricked, and so he yells out to Kanan and Ahsoka, but the first one to show up is who else but Darth fucking Vader. If you've seen the episode, you know I'm just gonna dread what's about to happen soon. Ezra stands up to Vader, who immediately breaks his gimmicky lightsaber,
and it's gone.
And just before he executes Ezra, Ahsoka shows up. And yep, this is the confrontation I was dreading. We all know how much I hate Ahsoka at this point. But the super important thing I want to talk about is how Ahsoka surviving past Season 5 of the Clone Wars completely ruins Anakin Skywalker's arc. A key point of Anakin becoming Darth Vader is that he was someone who lost everything at once. He had severed ties with all he had cared about. As far as he knew, his wife died, along with his unborn children, as well as Obi-Wan Kenobi, his near lifelong friend, whom he had grown a hatred for after their duel on Mustafar. All he had left was Palpatine, who was the closest thing he had someone to turn to. And I say that very loosely, as Palpatine was the one who manipulated him to lose everything in the first place. But with Ahsoka thrown into the mixer, it's all ruined. The point I'm making is that now it's not just Palpatine that Anakin has left before he discovers the existence of Luke. Nah, Ahsoka's still around. It was fucking weird that Ahsoka was never mentioned in Revenge of the Sith, despite being someone who would absolutely be hot on Anakin's mind, as apparently she's now the reason Anakin is so happy at the start of that movie. I guess one could argue that Anakin thought Ahsoka died in the crash, as shown in the very last scene of the Clone Wars, but I mean, like, Vader learns that Ahsoka survived around the start of this season, and he never doubts himself, or at the very least has second thoughts about serving the Emperor. When Vader discovered that Luke was his son, you bet he was furious that the Emperor had lied to him. And that's part of why he offered Luke a place at his side in Empire Strikes Back. So something I have to ask is, why the hell did Vader not have any sort of reaction to seeing Ahsoka Tano, his old apprentice, alive? He continued on his path of villainy even after seeing that Ahsoka was alive. We all know Vader can't be redeemed until episode 6, so Filoni just ignores the issue instead of addressing it. Phony Filoni just wanted to have his cake and eat it too, but unfortunately for him, it doesn't work that way. As soon as Ahsoka confronts Vader, they have an exchange, and they talk as if they don't know each other that well. Ahsoka and Anakin didn't leave on bad terms, so why can't Ahsoka try to redeem Anakin? In fact, she doesn't even try, instead talking about how her master would never be as bad as Vader to his face. I saw a video from Stupendous Wave in which Dave Filoni quote-unquote explained why Ahsoka could not turn Vader back to the light side. And apparently Filoni said that Ahsoka is a memory of Anakin Skywalker. And since Vader has done everything he can to bury the memory of Anakin, his first instinct is to flush out Ahsoka to keep that buried in his mind. And that Vader lives with the mentality that those once close to him betrayed him, not the other way around. Okay? But again, how exactly could Ahsoka in Vader's mind have betrayed him? Like, with Padme and Obi-Wan, it makes sense. Unless you count her leaving the Jedi Order, but again, that seems a bit flimsy as a betrayal, quote-unquote. I guess there was a part where an illusion of Anakin tells Ahsoka in that prior episode that she left him when he needed her the most, but then I could easily point out that Anakin could easily turn to Obi-Wan or Padme about losing Ahsoka as his apprentice and whatnot. Yeah, so this is the problem. Ahsoka was a shoehorned additional reason for Anakin to fall to the dark side, or have disagreements with the Council, whatever. And the retcon that her character was not thought out very carefully. George at least knew when to kill her off, but Phony Filoni did not. He just keeps her alive through a desire to satisfy his fetish, and nothing else. Ahsoka is a character implausible with the films, so if there was ever a time to kill her off, it was Season 5 of the Clone Wars, or sooner. Maybe Filoni could have had Ahsoka and Anakin on bad terms before or during his fall, but of course the overrated cowboy didn't think of that. So anyways, while Ahsoka and Vader are dueling, Kanan and Ezra grab the holocron and opt to escape on the Phantom, although Ahsoka stays behind because of course she does. She cuts open a bit of Vader's helmet, and there's a brief bit of interaction with Anakin inside or whatever, but the two keep dueling, and the temple closes as Kanan and Ezra are forced to leave her. My dick didn't even move once. This was such a big episode, and they couldn't deliver. Instead, I was thinking about how much I was dreading the confrontation between Ahsoka and Vader. At this point of the show, they leave Ahsoka's fate completely ambiguous, but I presume most would assume she died. I mean, it was pretty laughable that she could even last 10 seconds against Vader. So yeah, that's the entire trip to Malachor. Ezra and Kanan return to the Rebel base, and they play a bunch of grandiose music as they show that Maul escaped on no-name Inquisitor's TIE Fighter, as well as Vader leaving the temple alone without Ahsoka. And we see a bit of Ezra opening up the holocron, and that's Star Wars Rebels Season 2. Ugh. Well, that was a load of crap, wasn't it? I guess the good news is that we're halfway through this show, but the bad news is that we're only halfway. Still, halfway through something isn't that bad. I'd rather be halfway there than a quarter of the way through. Compared to the first season, Season 2 just intensifies in problems. Filler episodes, useless villains, a delayed story, Ahsoka and Rex just being there and expecting you to clap like seals, and the overall story only barely moves forward. In Season 1, they joined the larger rebellion which took 15 episodes. In Season 2, little gets accomplished in the wider galaxy, aside from a couple quick strikes against the Empire and finding a base and whatnot. It doesn't take 22 episodes to tell that, but that's Rebels for you. This show is actually hard to talk about because it's just a dull piece of shit. This was not an entertaining train wreck. On my first watch, it dragged from episode to episode to episode, so actually getting into the meat of the episodes the second time was really difficult. Still, I've done so. And now it's time to get into the super fun stuff next time. Since they decided to introduce a certain someone in the marketing for Season 3, oh boy, will that be a spicy discussion. So I'll probably give Rebels Season 2 a 3 out of 10, which is a slightly lower score than the first season. It's already hit rock bottom, I guess. There's nowhere to go but up, right? Or down to the bottomless pits. I'm JJ Plagiarisms, and until next time, what are stories but mystery boxes?
Under the mountain, a golden fountain. Were you praying at the